Hi, Wendy. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, Councillor Richter, we can hear you. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Good afternoon. So Ms. Bauer, I see Councillor Davis is not here, and he shows on the screen. So,
His computer is logged in, but he's not here. It's
Okay.
just his computer there.
okay, great, thanks. So just for the public's awareness, Councillor Davis is not here, but we do have every other member of council, including Councillor Woodward. I don't know if you want to put your mic, your camera on, so we know you're all here. And with that, I'll bring the regular meeting of Township Langley Council to order. And the first item is adoption and receipt of the agenda items. There's one change on the agenda, 03, as being withdrawn, as asked to be withdrawn by the proponent. So with that change, it is 03 or is it 02?
It's 02, sir.
02, yeah. I knew that and I wrote it down wrong. 02. So 02 being withdrawn. So that I'll ask for a motion to adopt and receive the agenda. Councillor Ferguson moves it. Seconder? Is there a seconder? Councillor Kunst? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 02 is the Neufeld application for everybody's information. So adoption of minutes. We have a special council meeting October 4th, regular council meeting October 4th, and public hearing meeting October 4th. I know Councillor Long, you had to change, maybe before I asked for the motion, maybe just ask the clerk about it. And then Councillor Long, I'll put you on. You had a question regarding the minutes.
Yeah, right. There was an amendment, and I just think that the amendment wording needs to be switched. It currently reads, as soon as practical prior to a meeting or in extenuating circumstances. I thought it should be reversed. In extenuating circumstances, as soon as practical prior to a meeting. I'm not sure how everybody else feels about that, but it doesn't to me, it doesn't make sense, but I'm not a teacher like some of you guys.
So on the minutes, that's recording the minutes. Is that something to look back on, or is it? I just want to get your take on it, or if it's that important. You know, the wording, maybe just tomatoes or tomatoes.
I think it is one of those cases, but if council would like it amended, we can definitely do that.
To me, it leaves you hanging when it says, or in extenuating circumstances, what? So anyway, I think that's the way I read it. I mean, that's the way I spoke it at the meeting, I believe. In extenuating circumstances, as soon as practical prior to a meeting, is how I believe it should be.
Okay, so what we can do is we can adopt the minutes with the proviso that Ms. Bauer will review.
A point of order, Mr. Mayor. I've got my hand up. I want to
sorry.
speak to this.
Okay, yeah. Well, there's no more. It's just a discussion. So what I was going to say, and I'll get to you right away, is that Ms. Bauer will review the record, and if there is a change to be made, we'll make the change if that's the case. Otherwise, it would have to be a new motion. Councillor Richter?
First of all, could people please reference which set of minutes they're referring
Sure.
to? So this particular comment that Councillor Long made, I assume it's referring to the special meeting.
Special close.
Yeah.
Special
Okay.
close. Special council meeting.
Now, with respect to that, if we approve these minutes, we're not necessarily approving that corollary or that condition, are we?
No, we're approving the minutes as if the motion. I haven't even asked for motion yet. The motion goes through on the minutes as they are. They're being approved.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
The bylaw has actually been approved as it was worded in the minutes, so it would take
Yes.
So it's essentially a finished bylaw at this point.
Yeah. So what we're leaving it at this point is that Ms. Bauer will go back and take a look at it. If the minutes or in the bylaw are incorrect, then she can bring that back to us. I don't think it's going to make a difference between now and the next meeting. So.
Okay, but I would like to ask some questions around this because I would like to know, number one, is every member of council double vaxxed? Number two, is every member of staff working with council at these open meetings double vaxxed. And number 3 is every member of staff that is going to have potential contact with the public at these meetings double vaxxed.
Okay, so at this point in time, I don't believe we have the authority, or we can't ask people's medical history or medical conditions, and that includes vaccinations. So,
we can ask.
Yeah, but that's
we just can't require yet.
That's right. So
but we can ask, okay. And as an employer, I think we should be asking.
Okay, fine, but that's not what we're talking about now. We're talking about minutes. So, I think that's something to be held for another question.
Well, I would just like to say I object very much to Councillor Long amending minutes on the fly because I don't rely on his
Councillor Richter,
very often.
he did not amend them on the fly. He had a question regarding the minutes.
It's okay. Richter, you do it all the time.
It's okay.
Thank
No, it's okay. It's just he wasn't amending it. He had a question, and I was clear. Councillor Long, let's not start off the meeting this way. This really was a question regarding. There's no motion on the floor. It was just to discuss. Councillor Woodward, you had a question regarding the minutes? We haven't even got a motion yet. We're just, if you wish to move them, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate staff cutting the corner out of this paper, so we can wait till the mic is on. If there's no motion on the floor, I'll just wait for a motion. I don't really know what we're even doing if the bylaw has been approved as noted in the minutes.
So,
what's the point of any of this? Thanks.
Do you wish to move the minutes then?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Whitmarsh? Any discussions on the minutes? Councillor Long, discussion on the minutes?
Yeah. I didn't mean to start a big controversy. If all of council feel that the wording is correct, I'm fine with it. But to me, it doesn't appear to be grammatically correct.
So the clerk will check the record, and if it's not, can come back at a future date.
And I just might add that there's no change that I can see to the intent. It's just the wording. The intent is exactly the same. We're not trying to change the intent. We're not trying to change the bylaw. It's just the wording seemed to me to be awkward. But that's fine.
That's fine.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Okay, on the minutes.
Yeah, I just want to clarify the direction that you summarized there. So if there's determined to be some sort of wording inconsistency with the recording, that would require a bylaw amendment to return to council table, so we'd be able to deal with it at that time rather than trying to deal with this right now. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. No delegations, no presentations. We go directly to reports to council. First one is the Community Amenity Contributions Policy. Did you adopt all the minutes? Yeah, we did. I did them all at once. Yeah. So the reports to council, Community Amenity Contributions Policy. Mr. Baca, did you wish to provide any introduction? Mr. Raman, or Mr. Sefi, I should say. Any introduction to the report?
Not really, Your Worship. If council has any questions, certainly we are available. I've asked our consultant, who council may recall, was able to provide council with a presentation in July after he had completed his task that we engaged him to do over the prior three or 4 months. He was able to proceed with the presentation to the council. Council then endorsed the approach, which we are now bringing forward in the form of a policy.
Thank you. Okay, if I could have a motion on Community Amenity Contributions Policy. Councillor Whitmarsh moves it, second by Councillor Kunst. Any discussion, questions? Seeing none, I will. Oh, Councillor Richter.
Mayor, my hand's up.
Okay, I'll have to keep. I've got to switch something over here because I'm missing. I've got too many places to look for hands up, so I'll do it on the Zoom. So here we go. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Richter.
Yes, my question is with respect to the second last paragraph on page 1 of the report. It says essentially that no amenity contributions are required for commercial or industrial development, and this will be taken on a case-by-case basis. But it also says subject to council's approval of adequacy. My question is, how will council know if it's adequate or not? What's the baseline?
Your Worship, I take the question from Councillor Richter to relate to commercial and industrial and institutional developments as opposed to residential. And if that is the case, this would be a subject of a rezoning. Typically, I would suggest, if not 100%, then close to 100% of applications that proceed to council require rezoning to facilitate the proposed development. And as part of that process, council will then determine if in fact it is something that could be defined, identified, categorized as extraordinary in terms of its scope, size, location, etc. The ones that come to mind are the recent applications in the Gloucester area. So if that is the case, then they would be negotiated on a case-by-case basis, and council either as part of the process or prior to the process, prior to the applications coming forward, would have the opportunity to advise council that there is, the adequacy of the contributions can be determined.
Okay, well, I have a real problem with the wording in this report, because the wording says would best be negotiated on a case-by-case and voluntary basis, and would be in the form of cash, in kind, or a combination of both, subject to council's approval of adequacy. Again, my question is, how on earth would council know what adequate is? What's the baseline?
Your Worship, there is no baseline really, because every application has to stand on its own merits. There are no specific provisions in the provincial legislation that allows a local government to actually acquire amenity contributions. That's why we're always very careful with the language to make sure it's a target. It's something that is a policy. It is something that is discretion of council, and it has to be on a voluntary basis because the roots of how we acquire these contributions are based in bonus density provisions as opposed to actual contributions. So hence the language being, fairly careful. And I guess just to add to that, it is not the report that we're asking council to endorse, but rather the policy.
Thank you. All right, I see no further discussion. I'll call the question. All those in favor of community amenity policy and opposed?
I'm opposed.
Councillor Woodward is opposed. Councillor Richter is opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. Move on to budget transfer for Yorkson Creek Bridge. It was a good report, pretty self-explanatory. Could I have a motion, please, unless somebody has questions? Councillor Arneson, second by Councillor Kuntz. Councillor Richter?
If we're going to take this money out of the Fort Langley Cemetery, where will the future monies for the Fort Langley Cemetery come from? Like, where will the replacement monies come from?
Mr. Sefi?
Thank you, Your Worship. The cemetery expansion project, Your Worship, has always been intended to be a multi-year project. The reason why it cannot proceed based on the previously anticipated timelines is because of the need for better coordinate, or I guess more responsiveness from the utility companies that we have no control over, specifically BC Hydro, in terms of the coordination and the removal of any conflict with our utilities along, I think it's St. Andrews. So because of that, we will be proposing to add what is required over the next 5 years, starting in 2022, with what you see on Council's agenda in the report, over the following 5 years to 2026.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Here it is.
Oh. Go ahead.
I like to wait for that delay.
Yeah.
Peace and quiet for a few seconds. If I may, question through the chair to staff. $320,000 over the budget. Is this an in-house contract, or do we get contractors to do this type of work, if I may?
Sefi?
Your Worship, this will be a contract. This is a fairly significant undertaking, and it will be more effectively and efficiently completed by a contractor.
Okay, so that leads to the question, and that question's coming up in many projects now right throughout the region. If a contractor is bidding on something and gets a bid, they do their best. Wouldn't some of that, if not all of that, change be up to the contractor? I know there's what they call the discrepancy of maybe 5% or something, if I may, through a chair. Does that exist still?
Your Worship, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm understanding the question from Councillor Ferguson correctly, it is to do with the risk that either the owner of a project or a contractor undertakes as part of the tendering process. So this increase, if you will, in the previously estimated budget was prior to the tender process, prior to the award of the contract, if you will. Had it been after the award of the contract, it would certainly be not the owners, i.e. the township's issue, but rather the contractor's issue. In this particular case, after the award of the contract, rather after the completion of the design and prior to the award, but as part of the tendering process, we have come to the realization that there is insufficient funds available to undertake the work because of the significant changes in the market conditions as far as labor and material is concerned.
But does not lead to the question. The question is, if I have somebody that wants to bid on a driveway that I'm building, and the guy quotes me, $1,000, and that's his quote. We've got a signed contract. He can't come back to me and charge me $2,000, can he?
Your Worship, it depends on the type of contract that is written. It really depends on the language, the amount of, I guess, rigor that an owner, in the case of Councillor Ferguson's example, the owner of the property where the driveway is being constructed, it really depends on the language that is used. Because typically what we do is we make sure that once we have a fixed price contract, then any price increases after the contract's been awarded are not the liability, if you will, of the owner, i.e. the township, but rather the contractor. In this case, this is prior to us being able to actually award because our very diligent procurement process requires us to actually have the funding in place prior to us being able to actually award a contract. So we have not yet awarded the contract.
Okay, this would be something we should maybe perhaps discuss at the budget, because as the cost, I mean, as many of us know in this community, as the cost of supplies, materials, steel, and everything else goes up, if we're giving out a contract, who will be the burden of the changes? And if the taxpayers of Langley leave an open contract and they have to pay out where it would be a challenge. So Mr. Mayor, I would just ask the people, either the minister, who's our finance person, and administration, to look at that as we look at the budget, because that's a concern to me. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm not opposed to this particular change because I think it's something I want to see the bridge done, but I'm concerned about the process.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Woodward? Okay, yeah, I didn't see that. Okay, great. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to call the question on the budget transfer. All those in favor? And opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you. Move on to the draft Metro 2050 Regional Growth Strategy update. Thank you very much for the report. I'd like to thank staff because I found it quite interesting. It's been working a long time on this update through Metro, and now we have had our opportunity to provide comments. And Metro, I will receive the comments from each municipality by way of a motion. So I appreciate the report. I appreciate the recommendations, and I agree with them. So, so at this point, if there's any questions from council on the report to staff, just questions on to the report, this would be a good time to have that discussion. This is a fairly important document. Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, I don't have any questions on the report, but I think that you've identified some of the challenges here again. Didn't even know this was going on until Thursday, so I would actually probably be making a deferral to the next meeting to have a chance to actually go over this and have more substantial discussions that aren't in such a political setting. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Anybody can make a deferral if they want. We did have a presentation from Metro not too long ago, I believe. So.
No, I was there for it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So this is questions on the report. Councillor Long.
Yes. Yeah, I appreciate the report too. I simply had a question that what is the deadline? Because as some have alluded, perhaps there'd be some other issues might pop up. And so is there, if we put this in right now, then we could still add to it if we needed to. And what is the deadline for receiving comment?
Mr. Sefi? I think it's October 31st.
Actually, no, Your Worship, we do have more time. November 26th is the deadline.
Okay, good.
Okay, well, I'm happy with what the report says, but I mean, if there are other things that pop up, perhaps it would be not a bad idea to put it off for a week then.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Arneson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I do appreciate that this is a very substantive report, and I know that staff has worked on this, and I had asked a question maybe to Mr. Safey a couple months ago about the lead up to this. So I probably will also support a deferral. But just to get some of the conversation started, since we're in an open meeting, I'd like to refer to some of the goals and strategies that are here that at least on their surface seem to challenge or conflict potentially with township plans. So I just wanted to flag that as something I think we need to have more discussion over, and also highlight the fact, Goal 3, for example, protect the environment and respond to climate change and natural hazards. And I specifically want to know how our rural areas are aligned with this goal. What is our strategy and our plan going forward? And the other one then is Strategy 111. I think it's on page 37, but that might not be the electronic page. It has to do with Metro's historical stance on the expansion of sewerage services to lands within a rural, agricultural, or designation. So I think that that's also an issue that we need to discuss. And the map right at the very end, rendering, that shows two areas in which we are showing a different zoning use than what Metro Vancouver is proposing. So I think those are two very, well, actually three in total, three interesting topics of conversation for us, and that we should use this interim time, since we have some, to establish more detailed conversation around those, from my point of view, most specifically. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kunst?
So, yeah, I noticed that Matthew Claxton from the Advance actually included an article about Metro Vancouver seeks input on rules to reduce cannabis grow odors. So was that something that would be included, as will staff be participating in those conversations with Metro? Or is that something different than the regional growth strategy update?
Mr. Safey?
That, Your Worship, would be an independent discussion. It is not, to my knowledge and understanding, it is not related to the regional growth strategy.
Okay, so maybe at some point, maybe in other business, I can maybe ask if staff will be participating independently, and also encourage our residents of Langley to be part of those discussions if they are not aware.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ferguson?
Okay. Was there an answer to that regarding, I don't know if I heard that exactly, about how we were going to present this to our residents?
Well, it's
Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
Yeah, I believe, well, I'm sorry, I must have missed something. I thought Mr. Safey took that note to make the, from what Councillor Kunst was speaking about. Councillor Kunst, were you satisfied, or did you want to?
Yeah, no, so I'll just bring it up in other business, and I'll ask
Okay,
the
thanks.
question about how we might do that.
Okay, okay. Councillor Ferguson, you go ahead.
Okay, good. No, obviously it's coming back. Perhaps coming back, depending on the majority vote of council. I did want to sound that Metro Vancouver is a large regional district with 21 member municipalities. Some different. I've often said delivering in an urban I guess planning system to a rural community is always, as Langley is always difficult. Surrey, the way they did it, and I don't know, I'm not going to compliment or not compliment. They've certainly grown in the last 30 years significantly, where they're over 500,000 people, and we're still, I guess, kicking around between 120, 140,000 people. And I think that was because we wanted to manage our growth. But that's how an urban system comes to a Metro Vancouver a regional area, which is made up of a number of things. I guess, Mr. Mayor, you and Councillor Richter, have you had your planning session for the budget? Strategic planning session, the strategic financial statement budget for Metro?
There have been several sessions,
Okay.
reports.
There's another one on Wednesday, Steve.
Okay, it's coming. Okay, so hopefully, I was going to ask you a question, but it's coming up Wednesday. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll wait for the deferral.
Councillor Davis?
Okay, Mike, can I talk? Can you hear me?
It's on. Yeah.
Okay, on one of the last pages, I know this is the regional, heavens, the strategy. I know Councillor Long and I always talk about this. On the last one of the last pages, it shows, nope, I guess it's even further. I was just there. Anyhow, I would support a deferral for another week, but they've got Aldergrove squared off. And I know that I guess I just never got into the nuts and bolts of this report. Maybe somebody could fill me in. This map shows what the regional strategy growth wants. I gotta look at it. Yeah, it shows what they want, and that's not the way it is right now. So if we vote for this today, does this mean that we are going to square up Aldergrove and take ALR land out of the surrounding areas? Because I know we've had some discussion about Aldergrove being asked to be square.
Okay, Mr. Seffi, if you comment on that.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just, I guess, for clarity, the Metro 2050 is not proposing a substantial, holistic, I guess, review or amendments to the existing 2040 plan. It is essentially the same plan. What they're hoping to do is two things. One, extend the period of its effectiveness by 10 years. So they're expanding the horizon, if you will, from 2040 to 2050. It has now been 10 years since the previous one was adopted. I think it was 2016. Actually, 2011. And as such, it is now time for a review, and they have done a review. It is not just Metro Vancouver, but across the region. It is fairly, everyone is fairly, I guess, united in their view that the majority of the goals and objectives are still valid and should form the basis of the 2050 plan. The other thing that the 2050 plan aims to do is put a bit more focus and emphasis on such things as the environment, the need for climate action. So that is the intent. So in terms of, as an example, the point that Councillor Davis raised, really there's no change between the 2050 plan and the 2040 plan that Council endorsed. So going forward, however, staff believes that in their, I guess, zeal in terms of making this new 2050 plan a bit more relevant, the region has gone a little bit beyond the mandate of what a RGS should be. And staff has highlighted 5 points for Council's information and endorsement as presented in Attachment B that staff is hoping Council would endorse that essentially relate to a few things. One was picked up, I think, by Councillor Arneson in terms of the mapping errors. The other one, I think also Councillor Arneson picked up on, was about servicing in the rural areas. All we're trying to do is, as I said, ensure the integrity of the 2040 plan, as well as historic entitlements, if you will, of being able to, for properties outside of the urban area, to be able to be serviced with the regional sewer system. So there's some mapping errors, there's some language issues, and ultimately it is a question of, has the region gone beyond what is a regional issue? And in some cases, we believe they have. As an example, again, I can only, I guess, categorize it in the sense of their zealousness to protect the region's agricultural land areas. They're moving towards what they call harmonization between zoning bylaws and OCPs. Well, zoning bylaws have no relevance to an RGS. We are trying to be very careful in making sure they understand that while we agree with the overall objectives of protecting farmland, we don't believe that a zoning bylaw of a municipality that goes back decades before the ALR was actually established should be connected with a regional plan that is supposed to meet the needs of the region from one end to the other. I hope that wasn't too long-winded.
No. It was hard to decipher my question, I think. I just, like on 240, It's got strategy 1.2, focus growth on urban centers and frequently transit developed areas. And in the 2050, it's got the same thing in there. But I thought that as a municipality, we have to, when we have 2 or 3 things come in, it has to meet the regional growth strategy. And I thought we were not sync in one of, there's something that's not sync. Can't put my finger on it right now. That we can't, well, Alder Grove is, the reason I'm picking on Alder Grove is because Alder Grove, it comes to there is a problem there. We want to expand it and grow it. However, it wasn't square. And some of this, to make it square, will take up agricultural land. Whether it's being used or not, it's agricultural land. And we have to be in sync somehow with regional growth strategy. Okay, that's why maybe I would support. Hey, I could find this out. Maybe this isn't the place for me to find it out, but I would sure support another meeting to come back to this.
Thank you. And just to clarify, Mr. Seffi, this is for regional districts throughout British Columbia. It's a statutory requirement, isn't it, by legislation that they have to renew or update, I should say, their regional growth strategies every 10 years?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Yeah, so this is a renewal of it. And as you mentioned, there's not a lot of change, but there's a few items in there, and this is the opportunity for each municipality to provide their input on it prior to it being adopted. But as you mentioned, there's not a lot of change, but these are documents that are always being updated, but it is legislatively required by the province. Councillor Woodward.
Deferral for one council meeting?
Okay, is there a seconder? Davis seconds. Any discussion? I'll call the question. Oh, Councillor Long on deferral.
Yeah, I'll support it because others on council have said it, but there seems to be a bit of a trend going on that we defer everything for a week. I guess some people haven't had time. I read the report. I think staff did a wonderful job on it. I brought up earlier that we have more time to add things if we needed to, if we found there was a deficiency or another item came up. I'm going to support it, but I don't really agree with deferring everything because we haven't had time to read it. I mean, we've had this amount of time, and I've had a good chance to look at my package. So if we do that with everything, we'll never get anything done, will we?
Okay, so this is on deferral. It's on this particular one. Councillor Ferguson, go ahead. Just on deferral.
Councillor Long, he obviously is in a better situation than many of us. I was photocopying my agenda on Sunday afternoon, Mr. Councillor Long, and we've had problems with our technical
So it's on deferral on this, that's all the discussion should be.
I just wanted, for point of information, that this council know that it's sometimes, we've changed to a new system this week, so I wanted to educate some people that figure a deferral is not warranted. That's my point.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Woodward?
Yeah, this is also on deferral. I mean, people are suggesting we haven't read the report because we want to read it again and maybe a third time and ask some pretty informed questions of staff without those questions being instantly questioned and opposed. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I'll call the question on deferral. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. Councillor Richter is opposed? Or opposed on deferral? Okay, it carries. Councillor Richter opposed. Okay. All right, move on to number 4, DCC front-ending agreement, Mitchell-Williams Pond, DWA Incorporated. Could I have a motion, please? Councillor Long, seconder. Second, Councillor Whitmarsh. Any questions? Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I can't hardly hear myself, but that's okay. I would like to ask through your worship to staff. I've had some questions with respect to this entire application, but it's now focused on the actual size of the detention pond. So I would like some more clarity around the fact that I believe that the detention pond was originally granted approval at a time prior to the new calculations for the size of detention ponds that are now being required because of climate change. So if I could ask the question in 2 separate parts. So the first one is, do we have an understanding of what the difference is between those sizes? Because this is a very substantial project that is actually going to go forward for, and, you know, retain water for this area as needed for decades. So first of all, what's the size difference between the two standards? And second of all, if we're allowing the sizing that was originally granted in 2015 to be grandfathered, then what is the calculation or other infrastructure we are putting in there in order to manage whatever difference that would be based on engineering projections? Thank you.
Mr. Seffi?
Thank you, Worship. The applications that are received, Your Worship, are typically processed based on the regulatory framework that's in place at the time that the applications are submitted. So this application, Councillor Arneson is correct, is following through and completing the requirements of development based on the time that it was submitted, which predates the update to the Subdivision Development Servicing Bylaw with respect to climate action items. Beyond that, what I can say is that, I guess on a going forward basis, there are measures beyond detention that staff is looking at incorporating in all developments. As council is aware, we're looking at rain gardens, we're looking at blue links, we're looking at infiltration where possible. So it's not one thing, it's a toolbox of many different tools that we try to employ to ensure that we meet the requirements of, I guess, the new world that we live in terms of climate action and make the community as resilient as possible.
Thank you. All right, I will see no further discussion. I'll call the question on DCC front-ending agreement. All those in favor? And opposed? I'm opposed. Councillor Arneson opposed. Motion carries. Move on to bylaws for first and second reading. And this is rezoning application number 100556 and development permit application number 101053, bylaw 5619, flat architecture. Could I have a motion, please? I'll move it. Councillor Long, and second by Councillor Davis. Questions? Councillor Richter.
Yeah, I just want to point out 49 significant trees on this property and only 3 will be retained. Why can't we do better than this in development? This is just not acceptable. It's removing our tree canopy at an alarming rate. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Long.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the policy that we have now that we adopted for COVID, that we wouldn't have public hearings any further. So this is another one that is, I guess, compliant with the neighborhood plan. So staff have deemed that it wouldn't require public hearing because that's the policy we have. So I'm wondering, you know, I don't know, we can't do it at this motion, Your Worship, but I think we should be discussing perhaps going back to public hearings if required, because we're getting a lot of input. There's a couple more coming down later on in the agenda that there's been an awful lot of public reaction to. So I just thought I'd make that comment, but I'm happy to vote for this one. But this is the place I thought I should put that comment in, Your Worship.
All right, thank you. The clerk took note of that. All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor and opposed?
I'm opposed.
Councillor Arneson and Councillor Richter opposed. Carries. We move on to zoning bylaw amendments, parking regulations, township-wide, excluding Fort Langley report, or bylaw, I should say 5698. Could I have a motion, please? Councillor Whitmarsh and seconder. Have a second? Councillor Kunst, Councillor Long.
Yeah, I would like council to consider an amendment to this. I've been in the restaurant business over 25 years, and it's never really made sense to me that we would require this additional parking for restaurants at all times. And there's been some other instances when we've had craft breweries pop up in industrial zones, which is a whole different thing with parking, but as soon as they serve food, they have to increase their parking spaces. It's almost as if we're trying to encourage people to drive to restaurants and breweries and so forth. I think that it should be the same all across the board, that the 1.35 that's being suggested is the way I look at it, one parking spot to 1.35 square meters, I think is what the other is, and restaurants have been picked at 20 square meters. So I'd like to propose that. Well, maybe I'll wait for other people to speak, but I think council should really consider reducing the need for parking, especially since we've had COVID, and we've allowed restaurants to use parking spaces for extended patios and so forth. There hasn't been any issues. People will always find their way to go to a restaurant. In all the years I've been in a restaurant, I don't think anyone said to me, oh boy, we were going to go to dinner at your place, but we couldn't find a parking spot right outside, so we went somewhere else. People will find a place to park. Maybe they walk a little bit. Maybe they can carpool more. Now we have Uber and other ride services available. There's plenty of ways to get to a restaurant. I don't think that we should be imposing these higher demand on parking for restaurants. So that's my concern, Your Worship. But I'll leave it with Council.
Thank you. Councilor Richter?
Yeah, I know, excuse me, on page 1, that staff also recommend developing a cash-in-lieu fee structure. How many cash-in-lieu situations do we have in the township, and what's been the cumulative effect of these?
Mrs. Savvy?
Your Worship, the question is fairly broad. In terms of parking cash in lieu, we do have a system in place in Fort Langley. In terms of how much money has been accumulated over the years, we'll have to look that up, Your Worship, and report back to Council maybe at a future date or maybe as part of a memorandum. The problem with cash in lieu systems, I guess generally speaking, is that they require fairly frequent updating because of the nature of the market in the, I guess, geographic area that we live in. We are fortunate, I guess, in some aspects, but it has consequences in that, the land values increase more quickly than we can keep up with, say, things such as the development cost charges for parkland acquisition purposes. So in this case, staff is recognizing that there is a need for accommodating some cases, not always, a variation to the bylaw requirements, and the best way that could be accomplished is possibly through a cash-in-lieu process, which we already have in place. It's just outdated, and also it appears to be a best practice across the region. As far as the numbers are concerned, Your Worship, again, just I guess in response to Councillor Long's comments, the 20 square meters, one parking stall requirement is again quite consistent. This was a very methodical approach that we undertook. We engaged the services of a consultant, traffic engineer, traffic consultants who reviewed the requirements across the region, not places, in downtown core, urban core, such as, say, Vancouver, but places that are very similar to us, such as, say, Maple Ridge, Coquitlam, Abbotsford, and Surrey. The challenge is always, where do people end up parking? And it always ends up being in the adjacent residential streets, or sorry, not adjacent, nearby residential streets. So the fact that restaurants are treated differently is something that has its roots in some experience and some science and some, I guess, practical considerations.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Woodward.
Yeah, thanks. I just had a couple of questions following up from Councillor Long's comments, actually. So I just wanted to confirm I understand this correctly, that we're separating retail from restaurant in terms of parking requirements.
Safi?
Your Worship, the proposal is to have a 35 square meter per parking stall requirement for all uses that are identified, i.e. retail, service commercial, office, financial institutions, all of those, 35 square meters for every parking stall. Whereas restaurants would be treated differently in that they would require one per 20 square meters.
Yeah, and what I wanted to clarify, just confirm, just to get a baseline to continue a few more questions, that currently they're the same. So retail and restaurants are not separated in the administration bylaw for the terms of parking requirements. And we would be heading down the road of separating retail from restaurant use. Just want to confirm that.
That's correct. It is correct that we are separating them, but the reason for the separation is to provide, I guess, a lower threshold or a lower requirement for everything except for restaurants. So we are reducing the requirements, if you will, for retail and other commercial uses.
I think that's well understood. So I appreciate that distinction, that this would be a new separation and different requirements for retail versus restaurants. which may have merit and be good or bad. I didn't even get to that. It was more just to confirm what we're doing here. We're going to be having separate parking requirements for restaurants versus other forms of ground level retail. So I wanted to ask a couple questions about how that's going to be administrated. So for example, if you have an existing building in, say, Willoughby Town Center, and you have a retail unit that's currently not restaurant use, not food service use, and you attempt to convert it from a different form of ground level retail to restaurant use, how would that work in terms of satisfying this updated bylaw?
Your Worship, the process would be either a business license renewal or a tenant improvement. If there's no tenant improvement being required as part of the conversion in the example that Councillor Woodward referenced, then at time of business license issuance, staff would review the parking requirements, and in the case of the example that Councillor Woodward referenced, it would be looked at in the overall, I guess, scheme of the development on a comprehensive basis as opposed to the individual basis. So on the site, for all the different types of uses, is there sufficient parking for the various component or the accumulation of the various components of uses on that property?
Yeah, so you would, if you were to convert a building that's currently, say, an auto insurance, and you want a unit within a building, you want to convert that now to restaurant use or food service, you would have to satisfy the requirements of 20 meters, one parking stall per 20 meters versus one parking stall per 35. So you would have to provide additional parking to be able to convert to that restaurant use?
If there's insufficient parking available.
Right,
yes.
so I think, and I don't know too many developments that build more parking than's required, especially in some of these especially given land values. So the concern I've got, where I was heading with this, is future flexibility of the urban environment. So if you construct a building and you can't possibly anticipate what things are going to look like 40, 50, 70 years out for the life of these structures, we're potentially to the point where we're going to have fewer restaurants than maybe we would want based upon a bylaw that's requiring parking stalls for them. So wouldn't we be wanting to motivate restaurant use rather than demotivate the construction of restaurants? That would be my concern, that this bylaw is essentially going to punish people for building restaurants. You'd have to pre-design and pre-plan your building for all the restaurant floor area that you're going to put in it from the beginning. And it'd be impossible to predict what the neighborhood might look like for the life of that building and the demand you might experience for some of that. I would prefer that we allow the urban environment to be flexible so that it can adjust and over time, respond to the needs of the market. The free market demand for restaurants might go up, might go down. If it goes up, how are some of these urban structures now going to respond to that? We would also be giving, to me, a significant unfair advantage to existing restaurants over new construction. So people that have built their restaurants under this old bylaw, and have them in place, and now you got new buildings, how many people are going to build restaurants when they have to provide this amount of parking for them? They're going to try, I would assume, they're going to try to plan for that floor area rather than having a flexible structure in the future. Is there any response to any of that, Mr. Sefi? Because I'm trying to be helpful and trying to identify some concerns I've got about impeding the free market in terms of flexibility of the urban environment.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Woodward. Thank you for the opportunity. Just for clarity, it may not be clear. We are not recommending an amendment to the to the requirements for parking for restaurants. We are suggesting keeping it the same. So currently, it is 20 square meters for every parking stall. We're proposing to retain that. The proposal is actually to reduce the requirements for other commercial uses. So I guess there is no change being contemplated here for restaurant uses. It is still the same as what it was before. It's just that the relaxation, if you will, or the reduction of the requirements for all other uses is not being extended to include restaurants based, as I said, on the study that was completed.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction, so I'm glad you made that distinction. The concern, of course, is that you have it the same, well, we have it the same currently, so that if retail wants to switch from restaurant back to retail, back to restaurant, that currently is not going to have any issues in regarding to the parking bylaw, versus now we're introducing some. Would that be fair?
That's correct, yes.
Yes, and so I think that's the larger concern that I've got, that we might be on some unintended consequences here. I had a number of issues with the consultant report. I think I've been fairly consistent in my desire to reduce parking requirements. And that, to me, in my opinion, has always led to better urban planning designed for people and not for cars. If we design our neighborhoods for cars, we're going to get cars. And so, to me, I'm in an awkward position where we're looking to reduce parking requirements, which I'm generally supportive of, but we're now reducing the flexibility for different uses. And I think we're going to be imposing undue hardship upon restaurant uses, which I think we should be motivating, especially in new developments. I'll leave it there, but in its current form, I don't support these changes. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Whitmarsh.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question through to staff for clarification. When I read the report that was provided, it did seem that before we did have two categories. We had a 20 meter square requirement for retail and service together, and then we had 28 meters squared for offices and financial institutions. So is that correct? Can you just maybe staff could just clarify that we did in fact have two different categories before, and we're going to continue with two categories?
Steffi?
Yes and no, Your Worship. We did have two categories. Councillor Whitmarsh is absolutely correct. We did have two categories, but I guess the discussion over the past few minutes has been around restaurants as opposed to financial institutions and offices. You're correct, Councillor Whitmarsh, through you, Your Worship, that the current regime has two sets of requirements, with restaurants being treated, if you will, the same as retail and service commercial, and then financial institutions and offices being the second category. So what we are doing right now is taking the restaurants out and keeping that requirement the same, but recommending reductions to the requirements of all other uses.
Right. Okay. So we've had two categories. I realize restaurants were lumped together with retail, and now they won't be. They'll be in their own separate category. I guess I struggle to see how difficult it would be to manage two. We've been doing it for years. We will continue to have two different divisions, and we do have the ability for cash-in-lieu, if that's an option for those situations that we have. And it's clear to me, at least, that restaurants and people parking restaurants, it's quite different kind of parking. When people go to restaurants, they tend to go to restaurants for an hour, maybe 2 hours, maybe longer. Whereas much of the other kind of parking, whether it's financial institution, office use, even maybe retail, it's much more common to be there for short periods of time. So more people can use the parking lot within an hour period than in a restaurant. So I support what's happening here with staff. I think these are good changes. It's quite a big relaxing of parking requirements across, which I think most councillors are supportive of. And it's keeping restaurants at the same, which is more in line with the kind of parking that happens at restaurants. So I support what's in here, and certainly like to hear from other councillors, but at this stage I think it's a good report with good recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you. Okay, so the motion is basically to give first and second reading, obviously, and to amend our zoning with respect, okay, excluding Fort Langley. You're also, and the second part of that being a cash-in-lieu for Aldergrove. I did want to say I was always reading through the report, saying the comparison with our other communities for I guess Chilliwack, Langley City, Mission, Abbotsford, Maple Ridge, Surrey, and the offices, the commercial and office pay are lower than other words. So is that something we need to look at, or that's just a comment in the report, if I may, through the chair?
Steffi?
Thank you, Your Worship. The recommendations, Your Worship, are all captured in the proposed bylaw that staff is recommending council give readings to, and it goes beyond the parking requirements for vehicles. It talks about other matters such as disabled parking. We are suggesting that we increase that requirement, as well as more active transportation in terms of requirements for bicycle parking, secured bicycle parking areas, as well as end-of-trip facilities within mixed-use buildings and developments. And then, as Councillor Ferguson pointed out, requesting Council's direction to proceed with updating the cash-in-lieu provisions for circumstances the Council may wish to extend a bit of a relaxation, if you will, rather than the strict requirements of the zoning bylaw. And bylaws are always subject to Council's direction to staff to amend or review, typically no more frequently than, say, twice a year. So we could monitor this and see how it goes. And again, the basis of what we're recommending is a study, as well as hands-on experience in the communities that have a number of these facilities in their core, such as Aldergrove and Fort Langley.
Okay, the only part I didn't understand of that comment, thank you very much, was monitor and see how it goes. What does that mean? What does that mean?
That means that, subject to a bylaw process, Council can direct staff based on public feedback, or staff could propose to Council in 6 months or in a year that we amend the requirements because of, as I said, unforeseen consequences.
Yeah, that's because we're going for a second reading. Okay, I understand that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Councillor Long, you're next, but did you just want to make the amendment, or if you did, I can go to Councillor Woodward to finish this up?
I'd like to make the amendment, but I wanted to speak to the
Okay.
report because I think
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to do both if I can, because it's my second chance, right?
You get a second chance on this, and then you can go.
Well, I'll get
and
more
come back.
if the amendment gets
Yeah.
a seconder at least, because the staff are relying on the report, and if you look at page 16 of the report, it actually isn't. We aren't in the middle. We aren't average. We're the lowest. Township of Langley is 1 space per 20. Chilliwack happens to be 1 space per 20, but the city of Langley is 1 per 31. Maple Ridge is 1 per 30. And Abbotsford even higher, and that's just our next door neighbor. So in Aldergrove, for example, Abbotsford is half the way down the street. So I think it's unfair, and I don't think it's forward thinking to restaurants. As I've said before, with the COVID, we've already, it's been proven in a way that reduced parking seems to be working, and people are finding other ways to get around. We should be encouraging ride share and so forth. So I really would like to attempt to, because I won't be able to sleep if I don't. I'm going to attempt the amendment, Your Worship, and do you want me to do that, or you want Councillor Woodward?
I'll go to Councillor Woodward and
first?
come back to
Well,
you.
I would like to put the amendment on, and it would be on page 4F2.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward?
I'll just wait for the amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Long.
So I'll move it on page 4F2, where it has the proposed rates are outlined in the table below. I would propose that we make it all 1 space per 35 square meters of GFA.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Long, second by Councillor Woodward. Amendment to change. Discussion on the amendment. Councillor Long, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I appreciate staff saying we could see how it goes, but my gosh, we do need some certainty. If you're building a restaurant, if you're investing in commercial space, I don't know if you want to have some uncertainty there. I think that we're making hopefully a positive change, and that certainly we can review bylaws as we go, but if we want people to invest in our community, I think we need to have some kind of certainty. So I'd much rather see this amendment go in now than to say, let's try it and see how it goes. I really, really do feel that the wave of the future, or the wave of today even, is that people walk more, people carpool a bit more. If you're going to have dinner with 4 people and you're all vaccinated or whatever, you may as well get in the same car. So I think that this requirement of just the 20, to me, is unfair to restaurants, and we do need our restaurants. There are far, far fewer small restaurants in our area these days because of economic reasons. And this cash-in-lieu, my goodness, if I was opening a restaurant, I don't think I'd have the extra 150 grand around to pay for 3 parking spots that I won't even get. But anyway, I would really ask council to support this change.
Councillor Woodward?
Yeah, well, I appreciate and support the change. So I'm just going to, I had a number of other examples written down around the flexibility of building ownership and what it's like to try to bring tenants in and bring tenants out, and the flexibility required. I don't see why we're singling out restaurants versus other forms of retail. You'll have some forms of retail that will generate significant parking demand and some that won't, and they'll be treated the same. And now restaurants are being singled out. You'll motivate smaller restaurants. You'll motivate not creating them at all. And I don't think that that's what we want. I think some of the comments here are a bit concerning. They sort of reveal a lack of understanding of the development process. The development process starts and ends roughly with the parking requirements. That's the first thing that's reviewed. That's the first thing that will inform the footprint of the building and other issues. The first thing that will inform what type of uses you're going to be able to even put in the building, given the size of the lot and so on. So the parking bylaws are extremely important, and I would love to see them drop even further. I think Councillor Law made another excellent point that we seem to have some of the highest parking requirements in the region, and as a result, I think we get auto-oriented development. So I think this is heading in the right direction, and I support the amendment and would like to see it aligned with all ground-level retail uses, restaurants and otherwise, having the same reduced requirements, and I think we'll have a better community for it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's an interesting conversation, and one that I'm not sure we can actually secure the best possible and longer term kind of approach. I'm tending to agree with Mr. Saifi on this, because I think for me there is so much uncertainty because of COVID. I'm just going to use an example today of something I heard of on the radio I've never heard of before, and it's called ghost kitchens. So it's an idea that different restaurateurs who otherwise would be operating out of a conventional kitchen/restaurant setup are now being able to operate and get licensed for areas, and they just rely on Uber and skip the dishes in order to deliver their food. So there is no staff, there is no overhead, and then there would be no parking, except people obviously have to come and go to get their food orders. But I see that increasingly happening. When I went out to dinner last night, there was few patrons, but many different vehicles coming and going. I'm beginning to think that because COVID had turned so many things on its head, that it would be wise to take a conditional view of changing this. And I understand the business model of certainty, and I appreciate the fact. I've been in the restaurant business myself, but not for a long time, and I wasn't a developer, so I don't understand that side of it. But I do see that it's important to differentiate, from my point of view, and tailor what it is that we're proposing. But this is obviously in the context of other communities, and Metro itself is trying to get us to reduce the number of parking spots, but then we don't have the adequate transit that we need for that. So I think I'm going to go with the consultant's report in the hopes that we will, based on anecdotal and factual information, not just conjecture at this point, but we're going to go with factual information about what unintended consequences this could have. And then we'll get back to this in about a year from now and see where we want to position ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is a good idea, and also we can watch and see how things go as time. So it's a valid point made by Councillor Long, and appreciate that. Now, maybe in the future, I can rely on some councillors for my tandem parking that I always like, and also split driveways that they've done, because we always have to find resident parking any way we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kunst.
Yeah, so I appreciate all the comments from my council colleagues. I do, hearing the arguments for making the amendment can really, thinking about what these businesses have, endured the past year and a half with COVID, I think I will support the amendment, just to, be supportive of our business community, in particular our restaurants. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Councillor Whitmarsh.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate the feedback from the different members of council. I'm not in the restaurant business and never have been, so I do appreciate the input from the different council members and the advice that they're providing. The report, does indicate no change here for restaurants. And when we have looked at the table of the other ones, there is quite a variety. There are some that certainly do provide less parking requirements than we do. Going down the list, Abbotsford certainly is less, City of Langley and Maple Ridge. But when we look at some of the other ones, they're actually quite a bit less than we are. Surrey has, and it's interesting, maybe this is a type of model, we base it on the size of the restaurant, but Surrey has a a model where if it's a very small restaurant, then they have less parking requirements. But as soon as a restaurant gets to a medium to large size restaurant, the numbers go down quite dramatically. In fact, down to 10 and even to 7, one parking spot for every even 7. So that's 1,600 square feet. I can think of a number of restaurants in Langley that would be in that neighborhood of size. There are other, of course, that are much smaller. Maybe it would be helpful for us to have a 2-tiered restaurant system like Surrey's used. That, of course, would now have us in 3 groupings. Maybe that makes it more confusing. But this is a recommendation from the consultants and the people who are experts in this area. And so I think we can always adjust bylaws. We can come back and look at them again. But based on the information we have here and putting us in about the middle of the communities around us, I'm going to continue to support what's in this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any further discussion, so I will call the question on the amendment, and the amendment is to put restaurant category in the same as the other categories, 1 to 35. So I believe that's the amendment. I'll call the question. All those in favor and opposed? Councillor Arneson, Councillor Whitmarsh opposed. The amendment carries. We're back to the main motion as amended. Don't see any further discussion. I'll call the question on the main motion as amended. All those in favor and opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you. Now we move on to Councillor Woodward.
Declaring a conflict of interest.
Okay, thank you.
And I want to thank staff for having this structured in this way. Thank you.
Okay, clerk a note. Okay, so we go to number 3, zoning bylaw amendments, parking regulations, Fort Langley, bylaw number 5749. Could I have a motion, please?
Your Worship, I'd like to move it with the same amendment as the previous one.
I think I'd prefer to do it separately, if we could just do that. Just move it, and then we'll take the amendment that way if there's any questions. And I understand where you're going with this, but if you could just move the motion, then I'll entertain the amendment. Councillor Davis moves it. Seconder? Councillor Whitmarsh? So the motion has been moved.
So I'd move the amendment. I've still got my hand up.
Yeah, I see that. Councillor Long.
Yeah, and if you go to F3, page 4, Your Worship, it's basically the same rationale as we've just finished discussing. Fort Langley is being brought into line with all of its uses except restaurants in all the other categories. So this, to me, is also a wonderful amendment in my mind, because we've always wondered why Fort Langley is different. And of course, there was reasons why it was different back in the days. It had a lot to do with sewer, actually, and having septic fields and so forth. But this would put us all on the same playing field, and I think that's the fairest way to go. So I would move that amendment be applied here on page F3 at page 4, where restaurants would be the same category as other uses.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Kuhn seconds the amendment. On the amendment, any further discussion? I think we've had a pretty good discussion already, so I'm going to call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? And any opposed? Councillor Arneson opposed. It carries. Back to the main motion as amended. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor and opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you. I'll ask Councillor Woodward to come back in. Okay, just for information, Councillor Woodward, number 3 carried with the same amendment as number 2. Just for information. It's the shortest Fort Langley discussion we've had, I think, in a long time. All right, we go to bylaws, first, second, third reading. Number 1 is Drainage Development Works Agreement Bylaw, Mitchell-Williams Pond DWA, Incorporated, bylaw number 5624. Could I have a motion, please? Councillor Ferguson moves it. Is there a seconder? Councillor Whitmarsh, discussion. Call the question. All those in favor of G1? And opposed? Councillor Arneson opposed. It carries. Thank you. Move on to bylaws for consideration at third reading. H1 is rezoning application number 100603 and development permit application number 101160. This is Dole. Deal at 6869 210th Street, bylaw 5743. Could I have a motion on third reading, please? Councillor Long moves it. Seconder? Your second? Councillor Whitmarsh, or Councillor Davis seconds it. Thank you. Discussion, Councillor Long.
Yeah, I imagine.
We'll there you are.
There we go. I imagine we're going to have a bit of a discussion on this because there has been some stuff. But I'd like to make that same comment again. I think this is a perfect example, or nothing's perfect these days, but it's a good example of where it'd be nice to get back into the chambers with public hearing, because there were a number of people that phoned me with different opinions. I had a little difficult time understanding their written submissions. Did speak to them on the phone, got a better idea perhaps, but I think if we have in-person meetings, we can get a better view, we can see the visuals, and have a better understanding on some of the concerns. But I have a question, if you don't mind, Your Worship. So first of all, this is, and maybe staff could comment through Your Worship, consistent with the neighborhood plan, confirmation of that, and secondly, is the height of the building consistent with the neighborhood plan and the density, and maybe we'll just leave it at those two things. Is it consistent, and is the height, therefore the height allowed and okay with staff, and is the density allowed and okay with staff?
Mr. Safi.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, on all counts, Your Worship. It is consistent with the neighborhood plan. In fact, in terms of density, is at the lowest range of the density that the land use plan Northeast Gordon Estates contemplated. But it is consistent in all accounts.
Thank you very much. Your Worship, just another question then. The issue of parking on 208A. Currently, there is a rain garden on one side. I don't know if that's going to be continued, but would there be parking allowed on one or both sides of the street there in the completion of this project? And if so, how do we deal with that?
Your Worship, would you like me to respond?
Yes, please.
So, Your Worship, the section north of the subject site, I think it's north of 69th Avenue. I'll try and, if it's okay with council, bring the slides up on the screen as well.
Good. Yeah.
But the section north that's already been constructed was constructed based on the bylaws that were applicable at that time, which required parking only on one side. We have now, since then, over the past few years, actually, based on council's direction, have amended our bylaws with a requirement for parking on both sides. So even though the section to the north remains as parking on one side with a blue link or a rain garden, if you will, on the east side of the street, while keeping that rain garden along the frontage of this property, there will also be parking on both sides as well, Your Worship.
But if you worship, but how could that be? I can see if we've changed things, that means when you're constructing a road, you're going to have to construct it a little bit wider, I would think. So here's a road, as has been mentioned by Mr. Safi, that's already constructed and in use. It certainly may not be wide enough for parking on both sides, and I don't understand how we can actually park on the rain. Wouldn't you fall into the ditch? I mean, I guess there's some issues there. But would the road be, under the new policy, which is asking developers to build with parking anticipated on both sides, would the roads not be wider than the one that exists now, north of, that would be 6866 on the map I've got?
So
Your Worship, simply put, there will be an additional requirement for widening along this property as opposed to the ones to the north to accommodate the, I think it's 2.4 meters of widening required for parking purposes. So there's an additional requirement for widening along this frontage.
Okay, so then north of 6866, which is constructed already, parking only on one side. The new stretch would be parking both sides, but the road widened.
That's correct.
Okay, well, thank you for that.
thank you. Councillor Whitmarsh.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So I had the opportunity, along with some other members of council, to view the site and walk around and take a look at it. And after looking at it, it does seem very challenging to try to fit 19 townhouses into that site. It is a very small triangle area. There is looks like a detention pond that's been grown up and right beside it. The road is quite narrow. It just seems very like trying, you know, as the proverbial saying is, to try and put a square peg into a round hole in this spot. And it doesn't seem to me, again, not a planner, but it doesn't seem to me to fit the neighborhood. The street, the houses across the street from it, nor the houses that would be beside it. And it seems to be that, to me, it would be more appropriate to consider having this look more similar to the neighborhood around it, to the houses that are across on 208A Street or along beside it on 208A. And it seems to me that they could redesign it to have it look much more appropriate with small homes very similar, as opposed to trying to stick 19 townhomes in. So I'd love to hear from other members of council, but certainly for me, based on my experience there and seeing what's there, I will, once we've heard from council, I would have a referral motion to give.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, certainly a challenging site, and also the number of correspondence and challenging questions we've had from the residents familiar with the area, and the fact that the ALR buffer, and we've been careful with ALR buffers, and I, for one, am also concerned about how we're going to do this. I know detention ponds are important in getting the actual sites in place. With the new storm warnings and the detention warnings are important, but I have some concerns about this site. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kunst.
After visiting the proposed development site, I too feel that this is just doesn't really fit the neighborhood. And just imagining 19 townhomes and everybody funneling out of that one road onto 208A just seems like it would be very challenging. So I would like to hear what other members of council have to say, and possibly see it referred for a better plan, maybe.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson.
Thank you, Worship. I have a couple of comments. I also went to see the site, but my comments are actually somewhat just taken out of the staff report. So I know that there was a substantial amount of information and diagrams that were indicating what would happen if you put the 3-story building on the escarpment and the viewscape, what that would look like. I'm challenged by the fact that the land on the south side of that is actually in the ALR. And it's true that it's heavily forested at this time, but I personally would not want to unnecessarily rely on the fact that those trees were going to remain. I know in our planning documents, we've got a strategy to make an arbor ribbon, and we also have a strategy to maintain the historic viewscape. So I'm challenged to think that a taller building, despite what the renderings show, would actually not be visible in the longer term, just because of where it is positioned. And my second thought is that, planning principles, to me, one of the things that I recall is that our tendency is, for a variety of reasons, to want to have density and height that is more in keeping with what the neighboring use is. And so in principle, I would expect, or would have expected, that this should be at the least possible height that would be next to the interface with the agricultural land reserve that's next door to it. And so I may be dated in my knowledge of planning principles, and maybe there are some exceptions, but I certainly think, having viewed the site then, that this is not an appropriate place to have townhomes. There isn't anything else like it in the area, visually speaking. There are obviously lots of townhomes, but they're in different neighborhoods. And so I don't think it's the best fit. And my analogy is, there's square peg in a round hole, but the other one is, it's just shoehorning something in. So those are my comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, I've got Councillor Ferguson. Is your hand still up from before? And Councillor Kunst? Okay. I have a question.
Your Worship.
Yes, Mr. Sefi, and I do have a question for you. Mr. Sefi, go ahead.
Sorry, did you have a question, Your Worship?
I
didn't
do.
wanna-
I do. I just want to maybe get a better explanation on the OCP and the NCP, the designation here. And you did make a comment that this is the lowest range of density. So under the planning for this area, which has been established, I would think, before a lot of this was developed, a lot of the neighboring homes were developed, is that it does call for multifamily. So under that designation, what options are there to bring it in line with some of the requests by the residents in the area as far as height, lower density, single family, or that sort of thing? Can you maybe comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I was actually going to request your permission to provide some comments before further deliberation, Your Worship. The thinking, if you will, somewhat changed in terms of development along the ALR boundary. From, I guess, the late 90s to the early 2000s. If you look at, for example, the Murrayville area, the density around the edge, around the boundary with ALR, it is fairly difficult to maintain with respect to the requirements of the ALC and the Ministry of Agriculture with respect to, as an example, provision of a fence, ensuring the long-term longevity of a buffer. So with those things in mind, then the Northeast Gordon Estates Plan contemplated, and appropriately so, in my opinion, a townhouse development that then provides for a better protection of then the buffer area with a strata in charge, as opposed to, say, a number of single-family homes along the edge. So that is one thing I wanted to mention. The second thing, Your Worship, in terms of the density, as I said earlier, this particular project is going with, I think the actual density amount is 16.6 UPA. Across the street, Your Worship, is 11 to 27 UPA. The 16.6 is at the lowest end of the range, which is 16 to 22. So if in fact it is the density that one is concerned about, I guess one thing that I would offer as comments is a single family development would say 6 to 8 units per acre, 8 UPA, would result in 16 units, each one of which will be provided for or have the ability to have a secondary suite. So that would then end up with double the amount in terms of the actual density. Whereas with a 19-unit townhouse, it would be limited to the 19, and there's no provision for a secondary suite in the basement. So beyond that, I guess, Your Worship, in terms of the funneling of traffic, I guess, because of the geographic constraints of this particular site, with ALR to the one side, with roads to the other side, with existing developments around it, this is actually a work in progress, if you will, or it has been a work in progress over the past number of years to try and achieve something that is actually quite sympathetic to the form and character of the area, such that the roads can actually be completed, such that the arbor ribbon along the 210th Street can be completed. So just some comments, Your Worship, in terms of density and the issues that were raised by Council.
Thank you. And I've got one further question. So the property that's also designated multifamily to the south, kind of the next triangle down, that has not been developed yet? Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Worship. I'm just going to bring up this one. I think you're referring to this other triangle.
That's right.
That has not been developed yet.
That's what I thought. So that is multifamily. So the only difference is that now there is the one that we're considering tonight seems to be orphaned, but in time it will be connected to multifamily. So I do see the planning there. So thanks for clarifying that. I am supportive of this. I think it does. And as you said, it's going to the lowest range that NCP has been there for a long time, and I think it's unfortunate. Maybe some people had other impressions from their realtor or from the developer, whoever, about that piece of property. But it has been in our plans, and I do understand the rationale for doing it with the buffer with the ALC. So I will be supporting this. However, I know that there's been a request for some amendments, and I'm going to go to Councillor Whitmarsh, then Councillor Arneson.
Yeah, thank you. I guess by way of comment, I appreciate that it's been, designated for multifamily. But, once being there, it doesn't seem to fit at all. I guess if we could, maybe if it was 2 stories, maybe if it was duplexes instead of townhouses, maybe it's not single-family homes, maybe there's a duplex option with 2-story, that kind of thing that could fit the neighborhood. I think 19 townhouses, 3 stories tall, feels like they're really going to be crammed into that triangle. It just doesn't seem to be an appropriate use, even though maybe that was the plan at one point. But now that we have single-family homes across the street, they're smaller single-family homes on smaller lots. That seems more appropriate. Even the houses right beside it are that way. So it does seem kind of odd. So, for me, certainly I would rather see this referred back to staff to work with a proponent to come up with a better plan that fits the neighborhood, both in height and in density. And I would suggest it should go down towards the 11 density as opposed to 16. But I think that it definitely needs some work before I'm prepared to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson?
Thank you, Worship. Through your Worship to Mr. Safey, when we're talking about the range of densities that are possible with the designation, the zoning that's there, I'm wondering if, and this might be further to if this gets deferred for the proponent to work with staff, if there is some sense that we could have most immediately of a duplex or quadruplex or something that would be of a smaller scale in terms of height that could balance off the kind of density that is anticipated in the plan, so that we could find something that I thought might fit more the scale of the rest of the housing around there. So I don't know what that looks like. I tried to do a calculation on the weekend, but I don't know enough about what that could look like on that site. I'm sure it takes a planner to figure that out. But if it could even approximate what the expectation is for that number, I think that would be very much appreciated.
Mrs.
Savvy? Your Worship, I'm not sure if there was a question that Councillor Arneson was asking or more comments for staff's information. I guess I don't know what density 11 across the street is a mixed-use residential development. The history of that site to the west was actually based on council's direction to try and provide for more density than what was contemplated prior to that, as opposed to lower density. We do take these numbers, the density projections, to then account for other things such as parks and school spaces and all those things in collaboration with other agencies. And historically, Your Worship, throughout Willoughby, I can say this with certainty that the densities that have been contemplated in our plans have been underachieved for the most part. So we do not have the numbers that plans typically project. We have lower numbers in terms of ultimate populations. As far as, I guess, the form and character, again, as I said earlier, this has been a balance to try and achieve some level of viability with respect to the types of homes that might be, I guess, marketable and attractive to a certain I guess, levels of income, given the constraints of the site, and a family orientation with ground orientation as opposed to something else. So all of these things have gone into the current design that council sees, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Richter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say that, what we're looking at on the screen in front of us right now is a map that was put together by planners years ago. And what we're facing right now is a reality now that parts of that plan have been built out. So I absolutely agree with what Councillor Whitmarsh is saying about referring it back, asking the proponent to work to blend in better with the surrounding housing that's there. I actually think it should be single family, but maybe duplexes could work as well. And so if Councillor Whitmarsh is going to make that motion, I will second it, or I will make the motion right now to send it back to staff to work with the proponent.
Okay, thank you. I will ask Councillor Long what he has to say, and then I'll come back. Councillor Long.
Yes, thank you. I just wondering about 68th Avenue because it looks to me like it's a one-way at the moment. I guess it will eventually be a two-way street, but is there any amendments going to be made to 68th with this development? And if not, I guess it still is, well, there'd be no way that people can come in there, is there? If you wanted to access this new development, you couldn't come in off 68th currently because it looks to me like it's only one way out. So could that be addressed?
Your Worship, the requirements of this particular application are to undertake road improvements fronting the site. That includes 68th Avenue to the extent that no additional property is required to be acquired. So the corner of where 68th Avenue meets 208th Street, 208A Street, that will be subject of refinement and completion of the 90-degree curve, if you will, as well as 208A Street, as we discussed earlier, and the completion of 210th Street with the provisions within the provisions of the plan that says that there shall be no road adjacent to the ALR boundary, but rather an arbor ribbon with appropriate attention to an appropriate buffer. So those are the requirements of the application going forward.
Thank you. I just need to be clear then. We're not talking, 210th is not going to be put through. It stays a dead end. And the 68th Avenue that runs to 208th, is that going to be improved so that you could make an entrance to the subject property from 208th?
Yes. 210th Street will not remain as is. It will be enhanced with a multi-use pathway, a trail, additional buffering, fencing, vegetation. So that's the treatment for 210. And then 208A Street will be updated to a collector, I believe, standard that requires parking on both sides. And then the connection to 68th Avenue, as I said earlier, to the extent that there's no additional dedication required on the south side, it will be upgraded to accommodate two-way traffic.
Excellent. Okay, but 210th will not be put through. It'll be upgraded, but it's not going to be connected to 68th.
That's correct.
All right, well, thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Whitmarsh. Just wait, there you go. Okay, you're on.
So I'd just like to make the referral motion to refer to staff to work with the proponent to design a plan that fits the neighborhood more appropriately.
I'll second.
Okay, so basically due to the concerns of the public, from the public input that we received, to
that's
look at ways to transition from single family to multifamily is what you're looking for?
Well, it's up to, I guess, the staff and the proponent, but whether it's duplex or single family or whatever, but it should reflect the neighborhood.
Okay.
I guess that's helpful. I'm not sure if you need specific, but.
I'm just going to check with Mr. Seffi on the wording of the motions to ensure that we have the correct and accurate direction to staff that you intend. Or the clerk can maybe read it back. It's been moved by Councillor Whitmarsh, second by Councillor Richter, but I just want to make sure we got the wording.
I currently have the motion as it's referred back to staff to work with the proponent to provide an application which better reflects the neighborhood.
Okay, is that sufficient, Mr. Seffi?
Kind of vague, isn't it?
I think it was better fits in with the neighborhood, not reflect.
Yeah, the transition from the, I guess, the zoning from across the street to the designation on this proponent's lot, because it's multifamily.
Well, just to address
I don't know
the
how we can go from
concerns.
multifamily density down to single family when it's already designated. So we're looking more at, I think the issues are transition.
Would it be density and height, Your Worship?
That could be.
It could be density and height. It's hard for me to tell the
You got to give
proponent or staff exactly what it should go in there, but I think that height's an issue and density's an issue, and how it fits with the rest of the neighborhood is an issue.
Okay, is that clear, Mr. Seffi?
Yes, thank you, Your
Okay,
Worship.
thank you. Okay, any discussion on that? Councillor Whitmarsh, do you wish to speak to it?
Spoken enough.
Okay, Councillor Ferguson on the,
Yeah, I had written down, prior to the motion being made and now being corrected, that I had written down, same as Mr. Backen has indicated, density, height, transition, and other things I might have come up with, the buffer, whether that was clarified. Yeah, it may have already been clarified, buffer between the subject and the ALR, and its clarification on the storm drainage system. Those are the things I had. Thank you very much.
yeah, thank you. Councillor Richter?
Yeah, I wanted to know why 210 is not connecting with 68. Is that something else that could be considered with this referral? Because I think 210 should connect with 68.
Mr. Seffi, can you please provide the rationale for it not connecting at this point?
Thank you, Your Worship. The rationale is to try and avoid impact to the ALR. Acquiring a complete 210 Street will necessitate property acquisition in lands which is agricultural.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so on this referral, I'll call the question. If I could have the screen back up with the, come back to, as I can see, members of council. Great, thanks. All right, I see no further discussion on the referral. I will call the question. All those in favor and those opposed. I'll be the sole opposition. Mayor Froh is opposed. And Councillor Long's opposed. And so it carries. Thank you. And we move on to, that was number 2, official community plan amendment and rezoning application number 100192 and development permit application number 101212, Compass Co-housing bylaw 5736 and 5737. Councillor Arneson moves it. Councillor Davis seconds it. All right, discussion. Don't see any. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor and opposed. Councillor Richter opposed. It carries. Thank you. Move on to bylaws for final adoption. I1 is rezoning application number 100558, and there's a development permit, application number 101060, bylaw 5543 and 5544. This is at 198 5568 Avenue. I have a motion on the bylaws. Councillor Davis and a seconder. Councillor Kunst, discussion on the bylaws. Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor and opposed? Carries unanimously. On the development permit, Councillor Long moves the development permit, second by Councillor Arneson. See no further discussion or any discussion. I'll call the question. All those in favor and opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you. That was I1. Move on to I2. This is rezoning application number 100470, Granite Homes Limited, bylaw 5256. Could I have a motion, please? I'll move it. Councillor Long and Councillor Ferguson seconds. Discussion. Don't see any. All those in favor? Opposed? And Councillor Arneson opposed. Councillor Richter opposed. It carries. Thank you. And move on to minutes of committees. We've got the Heritage Advisory Committee of October 6th. Could I have a motion to receive those? Councillor Arneson moves. Councillor Kuhn seconds. Any discussion? See none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carries unanimously. We have minutes from the Joint School District number 35 Municipal Liaison Committee of September 29th. Could I have a motion to receive? Councillor Whitmarsh and the seconder. Second, Councillor Arneson, discussion. Councillor Richter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. On page 2 of these minutes, on 56th Avenue safety concern, there's a statement in it that says we do not want to make this an issue between the township and school district. What exactly is meant by that?
I will ask.
It is an issue.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
what was the intent of this whole thing?
Councillor Whitmarsh, do you have were you on that committee? Yeah, maybe you can answer. Maybe you can provide some background. Thanks.
So from my recollection, and Councillor Woodward may also have some comments, but from my recollection, this was a statement made by members of the school board that trying to maintain good relationships between different government levels, and to rather than try and, as they might say, blame things on the township with people that might be concerned about some of the safety. They try to, rather than that, they work with them and try to work with us as the Township of Langley, and work together to try and deal with those safety matters rather than being divisive between two levels of government. That's my recollection of the comment.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any further discussion or questions, so I'll call the question on the School District Liaison Committee. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. We now have the CP Advisory Panel of October 7th. Could I have a motion to receive those minutes? Councillor Davis, second by Councillor Arneson. Any questions? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thanks. We'll go to the Mayor's Report. Mayor's Report. Short and sweet today. Well, short. I don't know how sweet, but I'll try. Good afternoon, everyone. And I see you arrived for the Mayor's Report. I always appreciate that. Thank you. Quite often I give it to an empty room, and it makes me glad. On Friday, October the 8th, I attended the 110th National Day of the Republic of China, Taiwan, reception. I'm going to wait for the picture. This is the Director General. The Taiwanese people are always such gracious hosts, and I thank them for inviting me to their double 10th day celebration. And a great celebration downtown Vancouver. And I know we had speeches from MPs, MLAs, and several mayors that were in attendance, and it's good to celebrate with them the 110 years. Several members of council and I attended a tour of a new private school, One School Global, on Phrasal Highway near 232 Street on October the 14th. Students are certainly enjoying this brand new facility. Sorry I didn't have a photo of the facility with me, but it's state-of-the-art and really an interesting way of learning. The students have teachers from all over the world that zoom in, and they were zooming long before COVID. So it's a small school of 48 students, and yet it's really an interesting form of learning. So I really appreciate it. I think Councillor Arneson was there with me, and Councillor Whitmarsh were there with me also as we helped open the new school. And early on October the 15th, Councillor Arneson, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Coutts, Councillor Long, Councillor Woodward, and myself got up and attended the 27th annual prayer breakfast. It was nice to be able to attend the event in person again, and I'd like to thank the Langley Leadership Prayer the Langley Leadership Prayer Breakfast Committee for organizing another wonderful event. And accompanied there by our MPs and our MLAs and first responders and teachers, pastors. It was great to be together and celebrate our beautiful community and enjoy their support. Council attended several events. October 12th, Councillor Kunst attended Township resident Dick Deck's 100th birthday celebration at the Langley Curling Club. And Mr. Deck is a World War II veteran and celebrated his 100th year by having cake and throwing a curling stone down the ice. And I don't know if anybody saw the article in the paper, but he's a World War II veteran and had spent time in a prisoner of war camp, and just has such a great outlook in life from what I could tell from the newspaper article. And thank you, Councillor Kunz. I would love to have been there. On October the 15th, Councillor Long participated in a meeting organized by the Fraser Health regarding updates on the response to the COVID-19 pandemic and to discuss areas where we could work collectively to respond to the crisis. And thank you for that. I don't know if any members of council would have anything further to add, if they wish to. Councillor Richter, I see your hand is up. And then
yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I was just wanting to say something under the Metro Vancouver report.
Yes.
Should I just go ahead and say it now?
Yeah, I was going to go into that next, but go.
Okay, I just wanted Councillor Ferguson had brought it up earlier. There is a Metro budget workshop, the final one tomorrow, and it does look like in 2022 the net effect of the changes to the budget will result in a 3.5% tax increase. Now that, of course, has to be ratified by the board at the next board meeting, but it looks like that's the direction it's heading. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And also like to mention there's as recent as Friday afternoon press release regarding a very, very large construction project in North Vancouver that Metro Vancouver had taken the steps to cancel the contract with the contractor. Very significant, and I can't really say too much more about it, but it's something that was a very difficult decision, and hopefully we can move forward with a new contractor and get that. It's a wastewater treatment plant in the $1 billion range, so very large. And so we had a special meeting for that and as directors. And now cancel the contract, which doesn't happen very often, but this one was serious enough. So there are some articles in the paper if anybody wants to research it, and is pretty good information in the paper. Also, TransLink board or TransLink management, along with the board endorsement, did mandate that all employees have to be double vaccinated or have to be vaccinated. So that's coming on stream. Seems to be a trend that's going through several different large organizations, along with our federal government has mandated all federal employees. That includes our local RCMP detachment, the members, and also the civilian staff that work there. So I wanted to bring that up. So I see some other hands. Councillor Ferguson and then Arneson. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a person that's a member of the Liquid Waste Committee of Metro, I did want to indicate that when I do get questions regarding the North Shore Waste Management Treatment Plant, I refer it to the Metro Vancouver because it's a very technical and expertise area regarding engineering. So I'm doing that on a regular basis, sending it forward to any questions or concerns on that to Metro Vancouver. They're dealing with that. On that same committee, we are also continuing with our program for educating the public, and now the next step is educating the public in greases and fats and other things that should not go down the drain, should wipe and go into basically the waste. So that's another my advertisement for today. Also, as Councillor Richter has indicated, I've had 2 presentations. I know the board is going to have their budget workshop. Metro Vancouver committee members have had, I've had 2 presentations by the senior staff and CAO of Metro Vancouver, Mr. Dobroboni, and the indication that keeps coming up, and Mr. Mayor, and I'm sure you are aware, is that the concept of a one sewage district that I'm sure Fraser, that we are right now, would not be very supportive of right now. So that's one thing you should watch out for. Another thing to watch out for is the implementation of a DCC, Metro for Water, coming up. That's something to keep your eyes on. And of course, expenses in other departments. We have to keep the taxes as affordable as possible for our citizens. Other than that, I was at I guess it was a celebration of the fibromyalgia folk. It was held, and the mayor of the city was there, as well as our MLA for Langley, and it was a well-attended event by the fibromyalgia people. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Worship. 2 things. The first one is Fraser Valley Regional Library. I just wanted to point out for anybody who might not have seen the wonderful article in the paper, this is Library Month. So it was totally encouraging people to go out and to see what wonderful free activities, books, and different materials are available. It was quite a good article, but it was by Matthew Claxton. So that's just about Library Month. And the other one is just a brief report. I'm on the Climate Action Committee for Metro, and we also look very much into the budget issues with the focus on climate action and many other of the roadmaps that we're currently working on. And so just at a high level, some of the things that were being discussed at the last meeting were an opportunity to work with a nonprofit organization called Race to Zero, having to do with our carbon action. Continuing advancements for the Metro Vancouver Regional District, the non-road diesel engine emission program, where we're trying to reduce the amount of those emissions in particular. Also, there was some interesting delegations because in terms of air quality for 2050, we're looking at a process of trying to get more compliance and less emissions based on the introduction of higher rates of fines for a variety of particulates going up. So the cement industry in particular was there to advocate for themselves, as well as organic processing. I know we're impacted by both of those in the township of Langley, but it remains an ongoing assessment and overview of how we can best manage our collective airshed as one of the things that we benefit from in the township of Langley in terms of making sure that our air quality continues to advance and improve despite the fact that obviously our population is growing in the region. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've got a couple of things. I did have a tour of new transfer and recycling stations, one in Coquitlam and one in Surrey, which is state-of-the-art. The Coquitlam one should open this fall later on, Surrey sometime next spring, where residents can go and they recycle and don't have to go through the scales. They can exit separately, or they can continue on, go through the scales and drop off to the waste transfer station. So it's 2 new facilities in Langley. Langley is going to be getting an upgrade in the near future, so it's something to look forward to. And also for council, the National Zero Waste Council Conference is on October 28th. It's an excellent conference. I would recommend everyone participate as much as you can. It's going to be online, so it's not hard to do. So certainly look forward to seeing a lot of people enjoying that one. It's some great speakers lined up. So that ends the reports, and we'll move back to the agenda. Oh, Councillor Ferguson, go ahead. Oh,
I missed it, but do the folks in the audience and others, I did want to say that as a member of the Indigenous Relations Committee of Metro Vancouver, there is an initiative to include member nations within our particular committee structure, and I know that's going to be going forward to the board. But it'll be something very, very positive, as well as we're looking with a number of other Indigenous communities throughout our region, the Metro Vancouver Regional District, in anything from properties to water to sewer plants to zoning and other things, and inclusive. And I think our committee has been very active with both treaty and other things. And our committee and the staff started off about 4 years ago getting about 1,000 requests per year. They're over 3,000 now. So we're a very active committee. We're working very, very hard on things. And I think there's one other thing I think that you or Councillor Richter would know. One of our parks was renamed again. I can't, was it?
Belcarra Park was renamed.
Belcarra Park,
and I can't,
right.
I'm sorry, I can't recall the name.
I can't recall the name as well, but I did want to point that out. We've been very, very active.
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
renamed First Nations name, and they had a celebration. I'm sorry I don't have the name, tip my tongue. They're never easy to pronounce. So we move on to items from prior meetings, and we have 01, Salmon River Uplands Rural Plan Amendments. And so this was a report for receipt, and see if there's anything else in here. I want to thank staff. Council asked staff to reach out to Council Arneson to discuss the intent, and it was a very good, thorough report, so I do appreciate that. So I would ask for a motion to receive the report. I don't know if there's... Councillor Arneson moves. Is there a seconder? Councillor Davis. Any discussion? Councillor Richter.
Yeah, the motion that's in front of council is receive and direct staff. Are we just receiving and then we're going to deal with the direct staff part, or is it the motion that is on the agenda, that is on the agenda?
On direct staff. So, yeah, there is. The motion is to receive and direct staff. Okay.
With respect to the attachment A, I think there's some very good things in that document. I'm a little concerned about a cash-in-lieu mechanism because I think that will allow some developments to get away with minimal trails, and also with spatial clustering, because I don't think we really want to get into high density in the Salmon River area. But as a way to start the process, I think this is good. And Mr. Mayor, after everyone's had a chance to speak, I have an amendment that I would like to put forward to the motion that would ensure that the framework apply both to the Newfield and Infinity developments, provided full and proper public consultation takes place on the framework before either of these developments are approved by council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. I do appreciate, and I'd like to echo the Mayor's comments with respect to staff for putting this together. And just to give some context, I was directed to help staff to, at the last meeting, try and understand what the details might look like in terms of this new framework. And so I have to say that I can highly commend Mr. Safi in particular for meeting with me on the Friday of the long weekend for Thanksgiving at 4 o'clock so we could go over what might be included. Council has not seen in its entirety the draft, and the challenge, I guess, was a short time frame in which there were high-level kind of a policy comments, really, about what could be anticipated in the area. So I liken it to somebody who wore War and Peace, and instead we got, the Coles Notes version. So in some respects, I do appreciate, especially the translation of these somewhat abstract comments into more planning terms of what could actually be workable with respect to developing an agreement with proponents and working towards that end. I do have a comment actually further to Councillor Richter's concern about this clustering idea. And not being a planner, I'm assuming that there is language that is connotes or suggestive of certain things. The clustering certainly did not intend, and maybe I don't have a problem with it being removed, but it did not intend for any kind of intensification of density. It's more the idea that further to the other language, it's a way to protect the other existing residential units. So anybody else who lives in the area, plus the people that are moving in there, to try and maintain a semblance of privacy with green space and that rural sense and aesthetic. So it wasn't meant to create a sense that suddenly we're going to be, creating townhomes or an apartment building in an area and do some kind of set off and have, trees that are set aside for that purpose. But like I said, I'm not bothered by the fact if we take that out. I think also, the articulation of this will be helpful, because as an overlay, I think it's going to take us a long ways toward where we want to be in terms of extraordinary planning that's very timely, current, and necessary given the, I'll call it the migration of individuals, enhanced migration to this area. So I'm very supportive of this, but I look forward to having an opportunity as council to deliberate and understand more clearly and concretely. Oh, I should talk actually about the cash-in-lieu. I understand a concern about cash-in-lieu, because does that mean that, but that's in the absence of having any bylaw or anything like that that could enforce this. And so if we were looking in the staff report, there's a larger map that includes all of the zoning and the areas currently that could be developed or have more population in the Salmon River uplands. So it was anticipating the potential that there could be properties that would wish to develop, but in a nominal way. And I would also like them to be considered for participation in this process. But I think that's one of the things that could be developed by staff to try and find some rational approach to who should pay what, because we can see with the conceptual map, there's a vast amount of trails that could be developed in the area, which I think is highly desirable. But then the question is, how will they be paid for? And if we're doing it in a piecemeal manner, it may be the case that it'll take us too long to develop it for the amount of people that will be moving there to use it as a successful amenity. So I'm open to other comments, obviously, from council, but I just once again want to thank staff for the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Whitmarsh.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do want to thank staff as well. I think this is a great start and a great framework to look at. I had a couple of questions through Your Worship to staff. And the first question is that in 1993, with the rural plan, there was a statement in that plan that mentioned that there'd be a more detailed plan setting out policy for future growth, subdivision, and agriculture. According to staff, is this the more detailed plan that is suggested? Is this what is intended by this framework?
Steffi?
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess, Your Worship, just in response to Councillor Arneson's questions, thank you for the comments. I just need to say that it was a long weekend, and Mr. Beckham was kind enough to only ask us to work on Monday just for half a day, as opposed to the entire day. As far as the response to Councillor Whitmarsh's question, yes is the quick answer, the short answer. In terms of the need for that subsequent plan, I just want to say that maybe some of the requirements for a plan as was envisioned back in 1993, those are no longer at play. But that said, yes, indeed, the planning framework that we put in front of council with collaboration or in collaboration with Councillor Arneson is indeed intended to address that requirement.
Right, okay, that's helpful. When I looked at the framework and looked at the categories, I think there's seven categories, I think. Six categories. And there's quite a bit of meat to each one of those statements. There's a lot there. I'm wondering just how your thoughts are, maybe Mr. Sefi, on operationalizing this and working with proponents who do want to look to develop in that area, and how you see this sort of being operationalized with quite meaty, quite depth points, but not in this document. It's a framework. The specifics aren't there. So just wondering how you see that working, if you see any particular challenges that there might be in working with proponents using this framework.
Your Worship, thank you for the opportunity. The framework, as Councillor Whitmarsh has identified, has pointed out, has 6 areas that relate to climate action, stormwater management, ecological protection, trail connectivity, water servicing, and protecting the rural character of the area. But fundamentally, at the beginning of the framework, Council will note a paragraph that discusses that these are in addition to existing tools that we have. Those tools are obviously bylaws and plans and strategies as adopted by Council. So this is not taking place of those, but rather in addition to those requirements. And to the extent that there may be, and I'm not suggesting that there is, but one never knows with interpretation of some language, in the event that there may be an argument of a conflict, then obviously the plans adopted by Council, the bylaws adopted by Council will overrule, supersede. So this is presented to ensure that there is some currency, if you will, to how we look at growth in the very sensitive Salmon River upland area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I want to move division on receipt and then the direction to staff.
Okay, is there a seconder to division? To first receive and then, is there a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Whitmarsh seconds it. I'm just going to call the question on division. All those in favor and opposed? Councillor Arneson opposed. Councillor Kunst opposed. Division carries. So perhaps, okay, so I'll carry on with the same speakers list. Councillor Woodward, did you have anything else?
Do you want to just vote on receipt and then we can carry on with the second?
We'll just do it all at once. I'll do one and then the other, so you can speak to either one.
No, I don't have any comments on the second motion, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Richter, did you have an amendment?
Yes, I did. Is it time for it?
Okay, so we did do a division. So how about we now vote on receipt and then we'll go to your amendment because that's the direct staff part of it. So I'm just going to call the question on receipt only. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries unanimously. All right, Councillor Richter, your amendment to the second part.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to point out, I know we've received the report, but the planning framework, I was very pleased to see number 4, C4 in it about tree canopy protection, and the removal of 4,000 trees or 5,000 or 10,000 trees in this area is just not acceptable. And I think we need to make that quite clear to the developers going forward. Anyway, the amendment that I would like to put in, and it would be a second paragraph that would follow the direct staff to utilize, okay, and then the second paragraph would be, and I've got it written out here, I'll send it to Ms. Bauer, and be it further resolved that the Salmon River Uplands Planning Framework, Attachment A, apply to both the Newfeld and Infinity developments, provided full and proper public consultation takes place on this framework before either of these developments are brought before Council for approval.
Okay, That's your motion. Is there a seconder? Councillor Arneson seconds it. Any discussion on that? Councillor Long?
Well, Your Worship, I would assume that these rural plan amendments would apply to everybody. I really feel that we keep picking on these two because they happen to be the first ones that come forward, but in fact, they're not. If you go back to the original tall timber development, which was done, I guess, 10, 15, actually more than that, 25 years ago, 30 years ago maybe. So, you know, I mean, these are all great objectives. I'm very happy with the work that Councillor Arnes has done with staff and the framework that staff have brought forward. I feel that council is always trying to complicate things, and I know that certain councils have an issue with these applications that are coming forward, but this is a framework that would apply to all of the Salmon River uplands, so I think segregating and picking out this one isn't right. Staff are going to look after the chronological order of these applications. The O2 has been removed tonight because I understand that Infinity, and I shouldn't even speak to it because we don't have Infinity here, but I know that there were some changes made to Infinity, and that's perhaps Neufeld are reacting to that, so there are some good things happening. If this passes tonight, which I'm quite supportive of, there'll be further improvements to all of the things that come forward to council, and they can be discussed in that context. And don't forget, we still haven't even gone to public hearing on any of these, where there'll be further input from the public and further improvements that could be made. So I'd rather not complicate things, Your Worship, or pick out specific applications which are actually not even, haven't even received first and second reading anyway. So.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions through the staff, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Bracken, can you confirm, I think that in some previous iterations of considering first and second and then deferral motions on the Neufeld application, there were considerations regarding the potential legality of imposing rural plan amendments upon existing applications? Can you give me an update on, a refresher on that, please?
Ms. Seffi?
Your Worship, I think the question was for Mr. Bracken.
Oh, Mr. Bracken.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. The general rule is, I have to speak in generalities, is that it can be done regarding provided certain steps are taken regarding the process. At this point, I guess the final analysis will depend upon the process that's undertaken. It's important to note that first and second reading hasn't yet been granted.
Okay, so maybe I'll try asking it again. So if this framework proceeds and consideration of rural plan amendments proceed and are completed, what would be the status of those potentially or not potentially being required of the two applications that have already been filed?
Your Worship, again, some of these topics are better left to closed agendas, but I would say that the question is not whether or not they would apply. I guess the question would be that does the timing of the applications mean that the actual new provisions are effective? So it's one that has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, and I think the passage of these at this time does not preclude that analysis, nor does it preclude a result that would indicate potentially that they do or don't apply. I think they would apply, but we're now getting into some evidentiary ground.
Thank you. Councillor Whitmarsh.
Thank you. I guess based on the comments of Mr. Bracken, whether they apply or not, or whether we have a motion that directly names them or not, probably doesn't really matter. I would suggest that in this case, that we do not identify specific applicants, that we focus on the framework, and that we apply that framework the best we can to all applicants in light of the comments from Mr. Bracken. And I would support what Councillor Long says, and let's not identify individual people that we're going to include or exclude. We should just move ahead with the framework.
Thank you. Councillor Richter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think because last week I just recall Mr. Bracken being quite clear that that we can require this to be in place or to be in effect for applications that are in the pipeline. So, I mean, I can change the wording to say, instead of naming the Newfield and Infinity developments, to read to any developments currently in the pipeline. That would cover them. I just want to make it clear that just because you're in the pipeline doesn't excuse you from this planning framework. And that's my intent of this addendum. So, Mr. Backen, maybe would it be better to drop the names out of it?
Your Worship, it would be beneficial not to be referring to any specific application, but just with a caveat, the determination of it ultimately will be on the timing of the application and the legislative framework in place. Council has a great deal of latitude to impose conditions as required as part of the use and density, but it's going to depend upon an analysis of the application and the impact of the regulatory structure that's put in place after the application. So just because those words are there does not mean it necessarily will apply, nor does it mean it necessarily won't apply. It depends upon an analysis in each case, from the timing of the application, the discussions that took place, notification of the actual potential changes and the impact of those changes on the development. By and large, the general principle is that they may apply. There just may be a certain process we have to go through.
Okay. Well, if that's the case, then, Mr. Mayor, maybe I should amend this motion to drop the names and just replace it with development applications in the pipeline.
In stream.
Okay, in stream, I guess. All right.
Or
And so that means that the amendment would make it that this framework apply to development applications, also apply to development applications in stream, provided full and proper public consultation takes place on this framework before any applications in stream are approved by council.
yeah, so removing the names and adding development applications in stream, basically, to your.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, is there a seconder to the, Councilor Arneson seconds it. So discussion on the amendment, to the amendment. Councilor Ferguson, your hand is up. Did you wish to speak to the? Okay, so I'm going to call the question on the amendment to the amendment. All those in favor? And opposed? Councilor Kunst, Councilor Long, Mayor Froese, Councilor Whitmarsh opposed. The amendment to the amendment carries. So we're on to the amendment as amended. And Councilor Ferguson, your hand was up for the amendment as amended. Did you wish, or the amendment before, if you wish to speak?
I think that I did want to point out a couple of my questions have been answered already. Number one, for clarification, 02 Newfield, that's been struck from the agenda. That's correct?
That's correct.
And so we're discussing something that's been struck from the agenda.
No. Yeah.
But, and we were, they make reference to it now, it's been taken off the table, but I did hear that as far as in the actual amendment or application 2 on page 01. Okay, so what we've done so far, if we've received the report on the Talman River Uplands, and we are moving forward with the amendment. I think that it's important to note, as Councillor Long and others have pointed out, that we have to look at all the area as best we possibly can and rule on them in the 1993, which is a while ago, the rural plan. And that I've sent a message to Mr. Safey, if I may through a chair, what kind of timelines, what kind of staff use and others might that entail, if I may through a chair?
Ms. Safey?
Your Worship, I guess the process as staff understands it to be, subject to Council's endorsement of the planning framework, preliminary planning framework as amended, would be for staff to conduct further discussions, consultations with not just the proponents of applications currently in stream, but other stakeholders and external parties. That would likely take a couple of weeks. It would probably take a staff person at, I'm guessing, maybe 20% of their capacity for the next, for that 2-week period. So that's 20% of 40, that's like 8 hours. And then subsequently, the completion of the framework and depending on how council wishes to proceed. I think I heard Councillor Richter as an example talking about a wider public input. That is not something that staff is currently contemplating or recommending because of the issues having been so clearly and evidently and as I said, positively made. So I don't think there are any areas that need to be investigated more. That said, depending on what council's direction might be, it might take another few weeks before we can actually conclude the public engagement if there's one contemplated by council. So I hope that answers the
Yes,
question.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Long.
And that's the part that concerns me with this amendment. The amendment's kind of on the fly, and it's asking for all kinds of things that are not contemplated in the report. We're quite happy with the report. We've received it already, and I think there have been very positive comments about the framework. We're going to embark on this detailed plan that was mentioned in the original plan, even though many of the issues that were to be addressed in that plan don't exist any longer. In fact, there's some comments in the preamble here of how well we've been managing that area in terms of respecting agriculture and so forth. So to me, it seems like this amendment is another way to stall everything off or do something beyond what the report is asking. I'm happy to support the work that staff has presented here in this framework to move on with it. I think it was clearly said that proponents of all kinds from everywhere in the Salmon River uplands will need to adhere to this. I don't understand why a developer wouldn't, because they're all very good things. In fact, the framework is extremely positive. To add this amendment in where there's all kinds of conditions now that there has to be public input undertaken and other aspects of approving this framework, I think if council can approve it right here and now, we should just move forward with it. So I'm not going to support this amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Whitmarsh.
Yeah, this is, I think this amendment does have a number of additional items in it. I'm not sure that at this stage it needs to go to public input. As it says at the top of the framework, there's a number of bylaws and policies, and not limited to the official community plan, the zoning bylaw, subdivision and development servicing bylaw, the climate action strategy, the community forest strategy, master transportation plan. Many of those things have already had significant public input in their development, and all of these neighborhoods are subject to those documents. In addition to that, this framework has 21 other action areas that need to be addressed by proponents for any development in the Salmon River uplands. This is, very significant, and I'm not sure if we need to now go to get more public feedback on this, things that have already received significant public feedback in their development phase. So I'm not supportive of this amendment. I appreciate that we want it to include to proponents in applications in stream, but to go through a public process now seems certainly over the top in my mind for what we've already done towards this, so I don't support it.
All right, thank you. I don't see any further. Oh, Councillor Richter.
If we remove the public process thing, which seems to be, not that I normally like removing public process. I think public process is a good thing. Would the, without this amendment, would the framework still apply to in-stream developments?
Mr. Backen?
Yeah. In short, Your Worship, yes, it would still apply, provided we did the analysis about the time of application. This might actually help. The analysis of the in-stream applications being applicable or subject to this will not vary by the language of the resolution. It's on a case-by-case basis depending upon the facts, the special facts that are there. So it would apply unless there is legal and policy grounds for it to be exempt because of the time of application.
Okay, well, I just think we need the amendment to make it clear that in-stream applications, I agree, it's quite clear it goes to all applications, but it's silent on the in-stream ones. And I think that's why we need an amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any further discussion. So on the amendment, I'll call the question. All those in favor and opposed? So we've got Councillor Long, Mayor Froese, Councillor Arneson, Councillor Whitmarsh, Councillor Kunst, Councillor Davis opposed. The amendment fails. We're back to the main motion. This is the second part of the main motion. We've already received it. I'm going to call the question on the main motion. All those in favor? And those opposed? So we got Councillor Long, Mayor Froese, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Woodward opposed. That's 4, that carries. Thank you. And so now we move on to other business. And before we go there, I did my research like I should have done before. And the name of the new park, which everyone's been waiting to hear, I'm sure it was, and I'm going to really try hard to pronounce this, Temtemixten, something like that. And and I've ruined it for the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. It's to respect their language, and I think when I tried to say that, I probably didn't respect it, and my apologies to them. But that's the new name for the Belcarra Park, and I think it goes a long ways towards truth and reconciliation, and something that I know Councillor Richter is on the Parks Board, and as Councillor Ferguson first mentioned, that Metro Vancouver is certainly working towards. So it was good news. Anyways, I'm sorry how I messed up the pronunciation, but I tried. We're going to go to other business, and we now have, just for those who just tuned in, number 202 has been withdrawn from the agenda, so we go directly to other business now. And Councillor Richter, I'll put you on.
Yes, I'd like to move the motion.
Okay, is there a seconder? Councillor Davis seconds. And I would ask for a motion to divide, and that would be the result that council requests staff to make the same presentation at upcoming open regular council meeting, and then divide that from before any final decisions are made to make it 2. So I'll move division. Is there a seconder on division? No seconder. Councillor Davis? Let's call the question on division. All those in favor? Oh, okay, want to speak to division? Okay, Councillor Woodward.
Got to ask a couple questions through the staff.
Sure, you go ahead.
Before we vote on anything. Just Mr. Backen, I want to just clarify this notice of motion in regards to potential Fort Langley issues. You don't see a pecuniary interest here wrapped up in this? Or do you?
I think you're asking in terms of, does this potential issue create a potential conflict of interest because of the nature of the impact on property owners? The information we have is that the improvement of streetscapes, generally speaking, that won't add any specific value to any particular property, would not create a pecuniary interest. It would fall to the classification of all those that fit within the general classification of the community.
Yeah, so then we have the interest in common, I think is what you're referring to. Would that be fair?
A common interest rule, that's right.
Interest rule. So the other one then would be a conflict of interest of another kind potentially arising here. So I was going to head in the direction of whether council would consider a deferral for 2 weeks to allow me, or for one council meeting to allow me to seek legal advice.
Okay. So move deferral for 2 weeks to get legal advice. Second by Councillor Ferguson. Okay, you've already explained it. Anybody else on deferral? Councillor Richter? You speak to the deferral.
The comment was made earlier that we spend way too much time in our meetings now deferring things, and I don't support deferral. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Long on deferral.
Well, Your Worship, I'm not even sure why we're having this motion to begin with, so I don't believe we should have a deferral or even entertain it. The presentation has been made to our committees. Policies have been adopted and been carried out. I don't see any need to be bringing this all up right now, so I'm opposed to pretty much all of this, or even having it on the agenda.
Thank you. So you're, okay. Councillor Arneson on deferral.
Thank you, Worship. Ordinarily, I think it's appropriate to have some time to consider things. I think there's been enough time to get a legal opinion between when we last heard about this and now. So I don't support deferring this. I think the time is of the essence. We need to have this conversation and to move on from here. So I'm not going to be supporting any deferral.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward?
Yeah, so I mean, I certainly would vote in favor of any other council member making this request. Everyone's going to have their different rationale for refusing it. We could certainly infer what that rationale will be at a future time. I find it a bit disappointing, of course, that there's no urgency to this particular issue. I mean, I recall the issue of wrapping Fort Langley transformers first starting up about 5 years ago. So if there's no willingness to allow a councillor to exercise their duty in accordance with the oath that I sow, then I'll have to take that under advisement that there will be no deferral for me to be able to do that, and I find that very, very disappointing and unfortunate.
Thank you. All right, on deferral, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? We've got Councillor Long, Mayor Froese, Councillor Arneson, Councillor Whitmarsh, Councillor Kuntz, Councillor Davis, and Councillor Richter. Motion failed. The deferral motion fails. So now, on division. Oh, you wish to speak to?
I have to address the fact before we take a motion, yeah.
Okay.
I can speak to that again. So just to the clerk, just siding on the edge of caution, given how political this has become, where facts don't seem to matter, I will be declaring a conflict of interest to edge on the side of extreme caution. Also, really not much choice, given the council wouldn't consider a deferral for that purpose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And just for your information, conflict of interest is something that a councillor has to decide on, and not legal counsel. All right, so I'm going to go back to my motion to divide. I'd like to have division on this. Did I have a seconder on that? Councillor Davis seconds division. So just call the question on division. All those in favor and opposed? Councillor Arneson and Councillor Kuntz opposed on division. Okay, thank you. So it carries. So we'll start with the presentation to an upcoming regular council meeting. So I would like to speak to that first. Certainly, it's good that this committee, Parks and Recreation Committee, Parks, Recreation, Culture, and well, I always get it wrong, Recreation, Culture, and Parks Advisory Committee had that presentation. As I understand from staff that and I have looked, the presentation or memo reflecting the presentation was distributed to council, what, 2 weeks ago or a week ago?
Last Thursday, sir.
Last Thursday, okay. So I'm not, I think it's great to hear more information, but we have had that information, and I don't see where I'm going to get any new information by listening to the presentation. So, and we usually have very full agendas, so I'm going to vote against having the presentation to council. And so, so it's I'll go to the speakers list. Councillor Richter.
Yeah, well, we did get the slides circulated from the Parks and Rec meeting, but slides are not the same as a presentation. And I just wanted to reinforce to council that the presentation that was done with the Recreation, Culture, and Parks Advisory Committee was very detailed. And certainly the process was outlined in that presentation, the process that would be followed. And the process was a transparent one that was very inclusive. And so I think we need to have that presentation in front of council because, and in an open meeting, because I think the public needs to know that the process was open and transparent. And certainly, I'm sure once we get the presentation, if we've got any questions surrounding the process, we will then have an opportunity as a council to discuss that process. So this is why I think we should be doing this. And this issue has gotten way too political, and it's totally unnecessarily political. And that's why I think the public needs to understand what the process was that was used in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Long.
Well, there was a process undertaken by staff. Council doesn't have to get involved with all of the different things that happen in the township. Good grief, we're doing things all over the place all the time. And I trust the staff. And as Councillor Richter said, the presentation seemed to say that everything was in order. If there was a concern, perhaps Councillor Richter, as a representative on that committee, should bring it to council if there's something untoward going on here or whatever. But I don't understand why we would be interfering in a process that has not only been vetted with our advisory committee and enacted upon by our staff, and in fact, a process has been completed. So what are we going to do when we hear this presentation or start to be interfering with what's already been done? To me, that just does not seem appropriate. I trust the staff. I trust that the process has been followed. And in fact, staff issued a statement saying that it had been followed to the T, an award been given. I'm delighted at the results of that award, and I don't feel that we should be moving any further down this road of trying to undo something that staff have already done, a process that has already been completed, and a result that I feel is quite appropriate.
Thank you. Councillor Whitmarsh.
Thank you, Your Worship. This council, the responsibility we have as a council is about governance and making good decisions on behalf of our community. And, we have a process in place that staff operate in determining these sorts of things, and the awarding of this case of artwork that would be painted on the hydro boxes was part of a township process. That's the process that we've adopted and we follow. I have full faith and trust in our staff. They made a presentation to an advisory committee of this council, the Recreation, Culture and Parks Advisory Committee, and it was very clear by the members of that committee that it was well received and that they thought there was good information provided. And Councillor Richter has already provided for us that there was great transparency and that there was good information there. So as the representative from council who sits on that committee, so there is no reason for us to interfere in a process because we might have had a request from a member of the community who would like us to look into something. That makes no sense to me at all. This is a good and fair process, and we dealt with it in a good manner. We did receive a letter to look into it, and we decided that it wasn't an appropriate letter, and we disregarded it because it was not appropriate. This is about supporting our community, and it's about people in our community being supported and understanding that we have a transparent process. And I stand by our staff, I stand by the process we have here, and we are about governance. We are not about getting in the weeds with our staff, and there's no reason for us to be doing that in any way, and I will not at all support having a presentation to come here. We've already gone through process, and we need to stick with that.
Councillor Arneson.
Thank you, Worship. I concur with my colleagues. I feel that, if I can stand back from this decision-making process, one of the things that I think we need to underline and highlight is, as Councillor Whitmarsh has said, we have a process that is already developed. It's a strategy. It is something that has already been given direction to staff to work through that. I think if we had any thoughts or concerns about it, the time to have expressed those would have been at the time when council, and I feel it would be inappropriate given the way that we work administratively. We are a governing body. We do not get involved in these processes because it leads to bias, it leads to conflicts, it leads to all sorts of situations which we must avoid at all costs because we cannot be seen to be doing that. And I can guarantee you that there are likely many situations where a request for proposal has gone forward as per our guidelines and through staff, and if there was a recommendation and something was decided as a result of our direction through staff, it may be the case that I personally don't approve of that for whatever reason, but that is not my job to make that call. It is not my job to try and undo something that has gone through a totally vetted process that's appropriate, that's transparent, that everybody can understand, and frankly, a decision has already been made. And just for context, it has been a long time since this was first discussed because I know I bought the motion and it was 2014 or 15. We were forced to wait until such time as the undergrounding was completed. And then at that time, we gave further instructions to our staff to start the process. They are the vetters of this process, but they do it at our guidance and council's will. So I would say there's nothing that I am contemplating to do to undo what staff has done because I'm perfectly satisfied that we have done everything that should be done according to what our regulations, our bylaws, and policies are. So I think saying other than that is really to start undermining. And if somebody wants to suggest that we should have a different process, I would direct them to our council process committee. Because if you have a problem with the way we're doing things, I think that's an appropriate venue to have this discussion.
Thank you. Excuse me, no, please, this is the chambers. We'll kind of keep it kind of mellow. No applause.
No booing.
Or no booing either, yeah. Especially because it turns to boos real easy. Councillor Davis.
It stirs up the air. We don't want COVID around. Lots have been said. I think the mayor wants to govern the township. I think that there is, I think I seconded it. I didn't get a copy, like I didn't read what the report was, or what the process was. So that's why I thought, because of the controversial, and I would wonder if sometimes this is what happens. Some people get really good at kind of being able to roll a rock off a mountain, and when it goes down, it causes a lot of problems. And I just would wonder if we have better things to do. I was here in 2015 when we received, I was astonished on how much it actually cost to cover a box. It's unbelievable. I think the first thing we should do is cover the box. Anyhow, I did find some more information from, from the artist, and the word hydro comes in, and hydro is only named because of the liability, because hydro doesn't want anybody touching their boxes so that they'll get killed. It's a liability thing. So a motion like this that comes at this time is something that I thought, well, okay, we can see. It'll give me an opportunity, and maybe I'm not up to speed like all the rest of the councillors, that we get a presentation. But I would have liked to have, if we're going to make decisions on things, it's nice to know what everybody heard, and I wasn't there at the advisory committee. So I'm going on too long. I just as well let this go. I think we got the right artist on the boxes. Let staff do their thing, and let's get back to figuring out how we're going to get some potholes put in our roads and all that sort of stuff. I'm not saying this isn't important, but I'm saying that we need to govern and get away from this sort of stuff. We're getting too much of this stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kunst.
I don't need a presentation. I have no desire to continue giving oxygen to this conversation about a valuable member of our First Nations community. When council was asked to receive this letter, it was immediately rejected with no discussion. This type of political interference over an art project has no place and will have no success here. Mr. Gabriel followed all the rules outlined in the RFE process, as did the staff. In fact, council isn't and should not be part of these discussions and these decisions about who gets awarded projects like this, so it doesn't become political. Mr. Gabriel was awarded the opportunity to have his art displayed on hydro boxes in Fort Langley, and I myself and the community are looking forward to seeing them. I hope Mr. Gabriel and his family will feel the support of this council and community, and I wish him success, much success in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you. There's been a lot said today, and I appreciate that. I think our job is to make decisions, and I wanted to thank Mr. Tolomello, who's in the audience today, for answering my questions on the weekend, taking time out of his day, because I had asked, we've got this motion on the table for Monday. I said, well, hasn't that step been taken? Have we not exhausted all the necessary steps? And he answered all my questions. Therefore, I didn't see a point. And also there's an addition to some information we got through email and through our package at the township here. So that in itself is one thing, but with respect to the people that are in these, political circle, I did want to ask one simple question to staff. I'm going to make this very, very simple. Has an award been given to any artist in the township yet? If I may, through the chair to staff.
Mr. Backman.
As of yet, Your Worship, I understand that has not yet occurred, but it is, I think, fairly close.
Okay, so just wanted to clarify that. Okay. That doesn't mean to say there won't be an award given, and I hope the artists that we've talked about are successful. And I will not be supporting this motion. I don't think there's a need to, but I think it's also important to clarify the points that has already been discussed over this time period. Yes, it is our job to vote. It's our job to introduce policies, introduce budget, and, Councillor Davis, fix potholes. That's my point, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Richter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I want to make it perfectly clear, I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that there's something untoward going on here, as Councillor Long has suggested. That is a wrong assumption on his part, and it's somewhat not kind or not respectful in the way it was made. Second thing, Councillor Arneson was quite detailed on the process. So I would like to ask her, can you tell me what the steps of the process were?
I think it's inappropriate we ask through the chair. Excuse me, it's through the chair, and I would be referring that question to staff.
Okay, well, I was there when the presentation was done to the Parks and Rec Committee, and the discussion ensued around trying to get as many people involved in this process as possible, including school children. There were some boxes that they were going to get classes, art classes, to try to design wraps for. There was talk about, of course, the First Nations being asked to get involved, as they absolutely should be. There was talk about some of the other artists that live up in Fort Langley, giving them an opportunity. So I guess the question that I have is, was the process as outlined followed? Which is different than this. I just wanted council to be aware of what the process was that was described. And I'm not getting a strong feeling that council, individual members of council, understand what the process was. So I agree with Councillor Kuntz. Let's not waste any more oxygen on this. Let's just move on.
Thank you. All right, so on the first part, that's the presentation only. I will call the question. All those in favor and opposed? So we've got Councillor Long, Mayor Froese, Councillor Arneson, Councillor Whitmarsh, Councillor Kuntz, Councillor Ferguson opposed. So I move on to the second part, and that's before any final decisions are to be made. And I'd like to make a comment on this. We do, councils, and it's been spoken by several members of council already, but I just want to sum it up. Council sets policy and bylaws for staff to follow, and that includes procurement policy. It is extremely dangerous, I think, for council to get involved in any procurement decisions once we've set policy. Our job is to oversee the policy and ensure that it's been carried out correctly. And if it isn't, then that's where we step in on the policy. If we wish to change the policy, that's also within council's purview. Council could vote and council could give direction to change direction that staff have gone. That certainly is within council's purview. However, I think it's fraught with danger in that we are then influencing against a policy and becomes, as we've heard a few times tonight, political, where I have a friend who's a great artist and I want my friend to be there, or I have somebody I don't want to be there, and it becomes political. And as a council, we've made these decisions to ensure that the politics are taken out of it, and we rest it with staff, and our job is to oversee that these are carried out properly, and I've seen nothing to show me that this hasn't been carried out properly. And no matter who it is, or what it is, or what type of product or service that the Township of Langley is procuring, there is a policy that protects our residents and protects the businesses we deal with, that they're going to be ensured of a fair process. And so far, I have nothing to show me that this has not been a fair process. So on the second part, which really is kind of contingent on the first one, before any final decisions are made, I think I should call the question on that. But I do see some comments. Councillor Whitmarsh and Councillor Richter. Councillor Whitmarsh.
Yeah, I guess my comment on this would maybe be in line with what you suggested, Councillor Froese. It's really dangerous for any member.
Mayor Froese.
Mayor Froese, sorry.
Careful.
That's what I meant, Mayor Froese.
The year away election.
Yeah, Mayor Froese. My apologies.
That's okay.
It's very dangerous for any member of council to try and enter into a process that staff is engaged in selecting these kinds of awards. Whether it comes from the council table like this, or whether it comes separate in the community, council members have to be very careful of those steps. And in this case, there was a letter written, and it came from a society in which one of our council members engaged in it. I think that's a problem. And so in this case, we need to allow the final decision to be made by our staff. It's a staff process, and we need to support that, and I will continue to support that and not be involved politically as a member of council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Richter?
You also have a point of order.
Point of order? Your point of order is just, let me get your mic, make sure your mic gets on. What is your point of order?
Well, would this not be moot, considering that the first part of the motion failed? I don't think that,
Technically it is, but let's have a vote.
I
and
think then we should
put it away.
stop discussion.
Well, I say technically it could be, but I'm not. I want to have a vote on it. The council will make that decision, not me. Councilor Richter, and then we'll call a vote.
Yeah, well, I was actually going to raise the same point as Councillor Long, because the first part of the motion failed. This seems like it's sort of hanging out there in limbo.
Yeah, it is.
So I don't really think the vote is necessary. But I also appreciate your comments, Mr. Mayor, that it's council's job to oversee the policy. Absolutely. And nowhere does this motion say that council would be stepping in to the carrying out of the policy. Like, it doesn't say council's going to make the decision. So these people who keep pointing fingers at members of council and saying you're interfering in the process, I would like to reply and say, no, I'm not. I'm just bringing or trying to bring the process to council's attention as part of our job to oversee policies and processes. So if a question is raised about how something is being done, do we not have an obligation to check and oversee? I think we do. But like I say, voting on this little bit here is probably redundant at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So just to be clear, I did rule that as part of it because we could make final decisions or other decisions. So this way, at least it'll be clear on how council feels. So I'm going to call the question on the second part. All those in favor? And those opposed? So it's Councillor Long, Mayor Froese, Councillor Arneson, Councillor Whitmarsh, Councillor Kuntz, Councillor Ferguson, and Councillor Davis. I didn't see your hand, Mike. Opposed. Okay, it's opposed, so that fails. So I'm now going to ask: is there any other business? Just.
Should I ask?
Oh yes, we have to wait for Councillor Woodward to come back. Yeah.
Got up, nobody would have known he was in his underwear. No.
How far do I go?
Without an APB.
He's not in the office, he's not in the lobby.
Okay, well, we'll just wait. Staff can do that. It's not necessary for you, so we'll just give it a minute. We'll just wait for staff we'll just take a seventh inning stretch then.
Mr. Mayor, how long are we going to continue waiting?
I've just asked the clerk to let me know. So it's in the clerk's hands.
Mr. Mayor, I believe we should continue. Ms. Little is still looking, but she should be back.
All right, we're going to reconvene the meeting. If I could have members of council please take their seats. Councilor Arneson, yeah, we have to. Okay. Yes, all right, we'll move on. This is other business, so I'm going to start with Councilor Richter. Councilor Richter.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I'm referring to items distributed today. And item number 18 on page 33, I would like to get an update from staff on the legal costs that have been incurred to date dealing with this matter. Item number 19 on page 38, I think council needs to have a follow-up report on this as soon as possible. It may not have been the intent of what happened.
Could you just maybe just explain what item 19 is? I just don't have it in front of me.
Okay, it's concerning an incident that occurred at the LEC.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and there is an accusation in that report that I think needs to be investigated. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll pass it on to staff.
And item number 20 on page 40, the creek disturbance. Could staff please follow up on that and get back to council? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Backen, that's good. And we'll go to Councillor Kunst. Yeah, there you are.
I just wanted to make council and staff aware that Metro Vancouver will be hosting webinars in October and November, 21st and the 4th. And they will be taking feedback as it relates to cannabis odor and the impact it has on the residents in our region. So that just as a
Thank you. And when is that, the dates again?
October 21st, 10 o'clock to 11, and November 4th, 1 to 2.
Okay, and November 4th. And that'll be on their website, metrovancouver.org.
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks for that. Any other business?
That too,
Sure.
if I may, through the chair, that would be helpful. Thank you, Councillor
Yeah,
Combs.
we'll get it sent out. Great, thanks. All right, need a motion to resolve the special close for the items on the agenda and on table.
So
Councillor
moved.
Kunst, Councillor Whitmer, seconds. Yeah, Councillor Long.
I'd like to remove item F5.
Okay, we'll do that when we're going to close. We can't do it now. We'll do it. So
Sure, can't do it now?
no, we can't do it now. Okay, Councillor Ferguson.
I have one item, F2, under F2.
Another one?
Okay, so our personnel. You have
Personnel, F2.
personnel. Okay,
Staying here anyway.
okay, okay. With that, I will.
Take a break?
Did I get a motion on that? I got a motion, did I? Yeah. Yeah, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And now a motion to terminate. Councillor Davis, second by Councillor Long. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. So we'll take a few minutes and then we'll.
What time do you want?
Oh, yeah, 5 minutes. Yeah, 5 minutes. Should be good.